The story began in a terrifying place. A man waved his hand, took a deep breath, and said it seemed he had failed again. He said if everything went smoothly, he would have a super heavy sword as dense as a neutron star. Staring at the hot liquid, he suddenly doubted he would ever succeed at this magic. He realized he could not fight on such unequal terms. Determined to shake off the thoughts, the man closed his eyes and took another very deep breath. Raising his hand high, he summoned the magic of flight and launched himself, thinking he should visit a crowded city he hadn't been to in a very long time, and at that moment memories of three people came to mind. One of them said he wasn't familiar with the area. Another said he had urgent business and had to leave. The third insisted he couldn't die and had to return to his family in the village, and he thought a loner had limits and should find companions. In an instant, the space in front of him split open, and a large portal opened nearby, surprising him greatly. His mouth opened and he froze, only gasping as he stared at the portal and wondered what it could possibly be. A magic circle suddenly appeared under his feet, drawing him toward an unusual object. He thought it might be flight magic, but he dismissed the idea quickly since he had no trouble with that kind of magic. As he neared the object, he grew more curious about the origin of the curvature of time and space. Panicked, he braced for battle, convinced that if the distortion began pulling in everything nearby, trouble was inevitable, and at the same moment a small hand appeared right in front of him, reaching for him. Confused, the man nearly took a step back, drawing his hands up toward his face and chest. In horror, he asked what it was all about. At that moment, a girl's silhouette slowly emerged from the curve, and she stepped out of the object with a soft smile. The man was charmed and blushed slightly, but his fear did not fade, so he asked the girl in a trembling voice who she was, and the stranger smiled and gently said she was pleased to meet you and that her name is Reseja, the goddess of invocations. After the sweet girl introduced herself, the room fell quiet. The man said nothing, and she simply stared and smiled. The man turned away from her, barely holding back his laughter. It was hard to believe she had just called herself a goddess because it sounded so funny. The stranger smiled calmly. Holding back a laugh, he cleared his throat and asked the girl what she was trying to say. The stranger apologized warmly and explained she was a goddess from another world who had come to find a hero to summon. Smiling, she said she wanted to arrive next to the strongest person in this world and asked if the man was the strongest. A shiver ran through the young man as he wondered whether the girl really wanted to tell children the fairy tale that a goddess chooses a hero and summons him to another world. To his surprise, God said these were not fairy tales. He froze, stunned that his unspoken thoughts had been answered. He wondered whether she had gotten past his anti-magic and read his mind. The man politely said he was Razel, the strongest man in the world, and added that he was the strongest among people. He looked at the girl and asked if he could walk the path of heroism with her. Razel thought that with her support, he could take on the perfect ones. Deeply pleased, the goddess asked if he would really go with her. Thanking him warmly, she noticed his violent reaction. Razel felt uneasy. He looked at her and asked what he had to do next. Rycia said that, following the king's orders, he had to defeat the demon king. Razel agreed, but inside he could not believe the girl's story. Regia smiled and pointed out to Razel the distortion she had come through. Then she asked if he was ready for their trip. Without thinking, the young man agreed easily, and Rycia immediately reached into the distortion. At the same moment, a loud crackling echoed across the square. Rysel's body began to crumble and warp. He tensed as he felt his body pull inward. The man believed that anyone who avoided risk would end up with nothing, so he decided to go. Razel chose not to resist pointlessly, closed his eyes, and let the current carry him. Moments later, Razel felt a tingle and opened his eyes to a vast room with Raisha and many others standing before him. Razel looked around in admiration and wondered if she was in another world. Razia stood behind the luxuriously dressed man and shook her head. Smiling, the man greeted Razel. He spread his arms wide and told the man that he, the country's king, had called him here. Razel scanned the area, saw strangers beside him, and realized he wasn't the only one called there. When Razel heard the king ask another man if only 4 heroes had been summoned, and the man confirmed that they had, he quickly realized something important. Looking at them, he saw they had very little magical power for heroes, and was genuinely amazed they were the strongest in their worlds. Razel wanted to check the status of those people, but a smiling man from another world said he would introduce new characters first, and Razel quickly decided it was best to listen. He said their world is home to 3 main races: humans, demi-humans, and demons. Demi-humans are very few and pose almost no threat to the others. As he listened, Razel realized that so far everything matched his home world. The man then grew very serious and said the whole problem was demons. He said humans and demons had been fighting constantly, but both sides had suddenly grown stronger recently. At the moment, humanity is under demon control. That was why they called all these people a conscripted hero, a civil servant, a fraud, a summoned hero, an adventurer, a realist, another summoned hero, a mercenary, a banza, and the summoned hero, unknown Rizal. Smiling, the guy thought that since he had once hunted demons, he had practiced well on them, and all the countries of the world flooded him with thanks. Bowing low, the man asked the heroes to help eliminate this evil race, saying they needed to defeat the demon lords so they could live the rest of their lives without worry. Fraud Grind said it sounded very tempting. Rial laughed and said it would be a good test of his strength. Banza said that since they are enemies of humanity, he will end them without question. Rizal remained silent. A maid carried a small tray with an object covered by a cloth. The man said they should first measure everyone's current abilities. Then he politely asked the heroes to place their hands on the crystal ball. They pulled back the cloth to reveal the ball. The test will show basic combat skills. The ball's formula cannot check for anything specific. Rizal wondered whether they actually wanted to turn mana levels and magical power into numbers with a formula. The overly smug Rial went first, laughing as he said he had been called there first and then touched the ball. A bright flash lit the air, and Rial looked baffled, asking what was happening. A man ran up to the balloon and insisted it could not be true. Rial looked confused and asked what was wrong, but the man fell silent and could not explain the adventurer's fighting strength. He said admiringly that Rial's combat strength was 4,097 units, an astonishing result. The rabbit was delighted, and the goddess let out a soft gasp. Rizal paused to consider whether the number was really that large. A cunning fraudster followed the adventurer. The fraudster adjusted his glasses and said it was his turn next. He placed his hand and found his fighting strength was 3,664 units. The man added that the civil servant was also very strong. Banza, with a combat strength of 3,776, was also checked quickly. The man said they could all stand up for themselves. The man beamed, saying this was exactly what they could expect from the summoned heroes. He turned to Rizal and announced the young man was next in line. Rizal calmly agreed and stepped forward. Approaching the ball, he was more interested in testing whether it could not compute something specific. The eyes of all the summoned heroes were fixed on him. Oddly, the ball did not react. Rizal quietly told the attendant the balloon wasn't working. The man apologized quickly and awkwardly, then laughed and said something was wrong with the subject. When he looked closely, he was very surprised. The man noticed the balloon had burst. Rizal, puzzled, asked what had happened, and the employee laughed awkwardly, said everything was fine, and told Rizal to check the combat strength again. The man put his hand on it, and his face went pale. In a guilty voice, he told the king that his fighting strength was 0 units. The ruler grew angry and demanded confirmation that the force was 0, and the employee admitted guiltily that everything was exactly as reported and the crystal was not damaged. Rizal raised his hand politely to speak about the device that deeply disturbed him. The king refused to listen and shouted for Rizal to leave, saying he would not accept anyone with no magic as a hero and ordering Rizal out of the castle immediately, leaving the man amazed. He asked the king to wait a bit, saying a mistake had occurred with 0 and he could certainly use magic. Turning around, he wondered if there was no way to fix it. The fire in the fireplace caught his eye, and an idea popped into his head. Rizal bent down quickly and held out his hand, telling the king to look as he used atomic reconstruction, a technique that requires at least 7,000 combat forces and perfectly shows what Rizal can do. Stunned and confused, the employee said the charcoal had really turned into a diamond, his hands shaking violently from excitement. Rizal smiled and asked the king how he felt. The man then asked if they now understood that he had magic, and another man reacted with displeasure and asked how the man could behave that way. Angry, the king shouted that no technology could turn coal into a diamond, and the guy was confused and asked what the man meant. Rizal said it was a common technique. A man assumed she could only exist in his world. The king shoved the young man in the chest and shouted at him to stop and be quiet, and another man sneered, called him a useless swindler, and told him to leave the castle. Rial laughed and said how sad it was. Fraud adjusted his glasses and smiled, saying it was such a sad life. Banza could not believe the man was trying to trick them with his fake. Rizal, stunned, tried to call on the goddess. The man thought that nobody here really knew this technique. The goddess stared at the man with indifference while he could not believe what was happening. The king shouted to the worker to call the guards, and the worker immediately obeyed and ran off. When the knights arrived, they told the man to take his stone. The king ordered Rizal not to come here again. The man ordered the guy expelled. Some time later, Rizal sat on a city street while surprised people walked past him. A girl pointed at him and asked her mother what was wrong as he sat silently. The woman warned her daughter not to look at him. Her daughter could not understand why. Razel sat on the edge of the fountain and mumbled dejectedly about what he should do next. Razel remembered how the king had driven him away. It seemed impossible that they'd thrown him out so easily. He sat there, furious at their audacity. He froze and fell silent. Then the man lifted his head enthusiastically and said he needed to change the subject. Razel set off, realizing he should have planned his next steps, but for now he wanted to be sure of something. The young man went to the tools and weapons workshop, where purchases were made only from visitors' hands. At the entrance, Razel was met by a man who immediately greeted the visitor. Razel was surprised to notice he had not seen the man before. The stranger put a gemstone on the counter and asked the man if he could buy it. The seller was surprised by the beauty of the diamond in front of him. The man asked why the guy hadn't taken it to the jewelry store. Razel said the diamond was artificial. The guy thought that trying to sell it to jewelers could be seen as fraud. Razel asked if any shops accepted fakes. The man replied with displeasure, saying the other guy was really joking with him. A man asked the seller if he had ever considered using jewelry in industry, for example as a cutter or as an image. The man was shocked and asked the other man what he meant. The other man said that if he sold the diamond to jewelers, he could live happily for 10 years. Razel, surprised, said he understood. He wondered whether anyone in the world was making fake stones. Confident there would be no trouble with the jewelers, the man told the guy to leave. He then asked me, with clear disdain, which country treats diamonds like that. Razel wanted to sell the diamond quickly and get the money and was disgusted that it was artificial. The guy clicked his tongue in displeasure. Sighing, Razel asked how much a night at the hotel would cost. The seller said the cheapest room was about 10,000 shares a night. The man sighed and said he understood. Razel asked what he thought of $70,000 for the diamond. Needing money urgently, the seller grew confused and was shocked by the young man's offer. Angrily, the man shouted about what the other man was carrying and asked if it was a new kind of charity, and Razel said no, explaining he just didn't want people to think he was a fraud if artificial diamonds became available in the future. Stunned, the seller firmly refused, saying he would be accused of cheating. Razel watched the man in silence, then offered another option, explaining that the man valued the diamond, but the other man urgently needed cash and asking what he thought about a $70,000 deposit, and the man agreed, saying the other man was probably in a difficult situation. Razel held out his hand and said they'd reached an agreement. The man shook Razel's hand and agreed. After that, the guy left the workshop and the man asked him to come back. Razel thought he finally had the money, even though it took longer. Razer realized alchemy was undeveloped in this world. The currency system here was completely different, and he faced a difficult road ahead. Mary's hotel was fairly quiet. The woman at the front desk told the man to leave without any food. Razel took a deep breath and said he was exhausted. Pressing a hand to his head, he added that he was in a completely strange world. He opened his eyes and decided he needed to collect his thoughts first. He refused to believe the goddess came from another world. She cast the interdimensional challenge, though he expected only a brief displacement. Magic here also worked very differently from Razel's home world. Startled, he shot out of bed and sat up. It seemed impossible and left him stunned. At that moment, he realized he was in a parallel world. He waved his hand to activate the quantum space analysis, and the results surprised him. Baffled, Razel asked why the laws of physics seemed broken here and noticed many unknown substances. Falling back onto the bed, Razel felt this seemed true and concluded that everything that had happened was not the work of the imaginary goddess, and he was sure his exile by the king had also surprised her. Thinking it over, he concluded that from that day on his task was to save the world, but he did not know if the goddess would be pleased if he killed the demon king. After that, he began to wonder what the demon king was really like. Razel pictured the demon king as a selfish, magically powerful madman who wanted to burn everything, and he wondered if the demon was so strong because nothing like it existed in his world. Turning onto his other side, he thought everything here was different because the demons were intelligent and ruled by a single leader, and that led him to a guess. Razel realized they might not be evil, but he knew nothing about the situation here and, because of the exile, did not expect any cooperation. Rising from bed, he said glibly that he'd made up his mind and now knew what to do. Confidently, he said he would meet the demon king in person. Razel wondered whether the magic from his world would work here. Deciding to try it, he activated the detection magic. A moment later, a small window appeared in the air, and Razel was delighted. A reconnaissance satellite appeared before him with a built-in printer, used to survey the area. Releasing a small object out the window, he He said it should cause no problems and ordered the satellite to plot a route to the Demon King's location. Razel lay back on the bed, closed his eyes, and said he could sleep while they plotted the route. Dawn arrived quickly, and with the first rays of the sun Razel opened his eyes. To his surprise, he slept until morning. Waking, he found the route map already prepared. The result surprised him again because it had turned out perfectly. Rolling up the card with magic, he activated his detection spell at the same time and noticed someone else in his room. Using powerful detection magic, he discovered people hiding in his room who were secretly watching him. A brief scan showed there were 5 in all. Razel quickly decided to eavesdrop on their conversation using magic. When asked if the other was sure Razel was staying at that hotel, the other replied there was no doubt, and Razel assumed the king had sent them. When the man stepped outside, the mercenaries slipped behind the roof and realized he was exactly who they needed, a summoned hero who had been thrown out of the palace. Razel turned the corner and saw that the king was clearly against the man, and the mercenaries asked if everyone was in their places. They repeated their plan to kill the target and bring his head as proof. Razel glanced back and thought about taking advantage of the assassin aiming at him, grin. Seeing no one nearby, the mercenaries moved forward with the operation. Following the order, one of them reached into his pocket. Pulling out a small bundle, he quickly threw a dart at Razel's neck, and Razel immediately realized it was a fast-acting sleep poison that could be countered with defensive magic. He feigned unconsciousness and collapsed to the ground, drawing the mercenaries around him. They said the mission was complete and they only needed to dispose of the evidence. A mercenary pressed his sword to Razel's neck and grabbed his collar. At that moment, Razel spoke about a quick reception. He suddenly sprang to his feet, surprising the mercenaries in the room, then used lightning magic that left them stunned. Everyone in the room hit the floor, trembling from the attack, as Razel created a fog and told the mercenaries to get some sleep. He reached his hand through the window to examine something. The man assumed it was in his inventory. Razel pulled out the multifunctional stem cell he had found. This cellular element is the basis for cloning. It is needed to clone a person and further develop his skills. He could not always produce clones with high combat abilities, so he had to store the element to keep it safe. Razel suspected it would not replicate his abilities, only his body's appearance. The man applied the technique of cellular differentiation. Moments later, a shell of a body appeared before Razel. He started adding details, giving it a bullet wound and dressing it. Razel feared he might not even be allowed to live. When he finished, he assumed his magic had already restored the area, so others would take care of the rest. Razel stretched wearily, said some unwanted work had arrived, and then declared firmly that we must now go to the place where the demons live. As dusk fell over the city, the man lying on the floor moaned and stirred. The mercenaries slowly came to, and they were at a loss, unable to tell what had happened. One suggested they had lost consciousness. Another said he wasn't sure and suggested they might have been caught by the target's defensive magic. At that moment, one mercenary froze in shock. The others asked what had happened. Razel lay on the floor before them. They looked at him and announced he was dead. Angrily, the mercenary shouted that they had just wasted their time and cursed at the guy, then quickly swung his sword and wounded him. The mercenary turned to the others and ordered them to take the head, and they agreed, saying it was time to go. People walked away from the crime scene, leaving Razel's body in the middle of a small alley. Night had deepened and a large moon rose over the dark castle. Razel looked at it and said it was probably a demon castle. At the big gate, 2 guards stood watch when someone suddenly walked toward them, and they shouted in surprise for the stranger to stop. Spears barred Razel's path as the knights closed around him, ordering him to stand still and calling him man, and Razel looked slightly surprised as they demanded to know what he was doing there. Razel said he wanted to talk to the Demon King, asked the knights to bring the man to him, and they exchanged looks of disbelief. They raised their spears again, pointed them at the guy, and swore at Razel to stop joking, while the knight told the guy it was foolish to think a man could see the Demon King just because he needed to talk to him. Razel raised his hands in confusion and apologized sincerely for the sudden visit. He said he would schedule a business meeting, and his behavior greatly shocked the knights. The crowd shouted that they would never let someone arrange a business meeting just to meet the Demon King, and the knight told the man to check his clothes first while stressing that he was a hero. Razel pushed the spear away from his face and said he was a hero, but the king had banished him. The knight stared in shock at the man who had just spoken about the exile. The young man went on, saying that this morning he had nearly been killed by the king's agents. That night people were shocked to learn about the assassins. Razel spoke with pity about what a man is. He added that, given what the man had been through, siding with the Demon King did not seem so strange, and he asked the knights if they agreed. The knight pointed his weapon at the man again, and the man gave a tense sigh. Shouting, he said everything was exactly the same as before. Quoting another hero, he said the enemy of his enemy is a friend. He added they would not repeat the same mistake. Rizel saw this as a problem and said the strategy had already been used, and the other man thought brainwashing was one of the options so far, so Rizel raised a finger and said he would change his question. Pointing to the top of the castle, he asked whether there was a pathetic semblance of a barrier on that tower, and the knights froze in shock. One of them, confused, tried to ask what that had been. The second reacted angrily, asking whether the man had called him pathetic. The knight, filled with anger, began shouting about how the man dared to insult the demon lord's carefully built, all-powerful universal barrier. The second knight panicked slightly and called out to his friend, telling him it was not worth discussing. Rizel smiled contentedly after hearing this and thanked the knights. The man realized he was really there. Standing in the night in shock, he thought about what he had blabbed. He forced a confident look and said it was not important. The knight said if the man thinks he can get through the barrier, he would like to see it. The second knight, confused, tried to call out to him. Rizel winked at the knight to show he agreed, then waved his finger. The man hadn't expected to need powerful teleportation magic for a barrier this strong. A seal formed beneath his feet. He faced the knights and said they would see each other again. His body slowly dissolved into thin air. The knights could not believe he was serious. Rizel's body began to dissolve and soon vanished entirely. The knight could not make sense of what had just happened. They watched in shock as the man in front of them disappeared. Rizel broke into small molecules that quickly moved toward a tall tower, where the man's body reappeared. The man set off, aware this was the Demon King's room, and he'd already planned his next move when someone suddenly called out to him. Pointing at the man inside, the stunt girl rose from her throne and asked in shock who he was. Rizel looked at the girl and judged her to be about 100 times more capable than those at the gate, with plenty of battle experience. The girl screamed in shock at the man's presence, insisting it couldn't be and challenging him about the barrier's failure, while Rizel said that if she had set the barrier, he had something to say. He said it would probably be better if he called her the Princess of Darkness. Confused, she asked him to repeat what he had just said. Smiling contentedly, the girl said she was indeed the Princess of Darkness. She then asked the man who he was and why he was there. Rizel apologized to the princess for passing through her barrier without a minute's notice. At that moment, the girl screamed in surprise. Rizel said he'd be upset if he ruined the girl's work, but since the barrier wasn't damaged, he asked the princess to forgive him, and the girl replied awkwardly that it was ridiculous he had managed to pass through the barrier. Surprised, the Princess of Darkness rose from her seat, wondering who the man was. Her unease grew because she did not know what he wanted. At that moment, the man put his hand to his chest. Rizel introduced himself to the princess, saying he had originally been sent to this world to be a hero, told me he had been expelled under certain circumstances, so he belonged to no side, and said he had come to ask the girl about this world, which left her in a stupor. The young man looked at the Princess of Darkness and said he would ask her one last time whether she would answer his questions. At that moment, dark energy wrapped around her and her face darkened. A seal appeared beneath the princess's feet, and she started to explain that the hero had really come to ask about those things, angrily telling the man not to joke with her. Rizel stared at the seal beneath his feet, swearing silently as he realized he had probably chosen the wrong way to meet the princess. Raising his hand, the man formed a small seal beside it, and moments later the wall next to him exploded, causing the girl to attack him as she shouted indignantly that he was an impudent man. Calmly, Rizel defended himself, saying he had no proof he came here on his own and not as a hero. The Princess of Darkness stood amid the rubble, surrounded by a column of dust, smiled, and said the man was smart enough. The man looked at the woman, stayed still, and thought about what to do next. Rizel heard a noise as two demons rushed into the room. The girl anxiously asked the queen if she was all right. The demons noticed the intruder and stopped. A man looked at Rizel and asked who the intruder was. The Princess of Darkness shouted to her subjects to be careful, saying her attacks did not work on him. Rizel realized his power was only about 80% of the girls. The man shouted to the princess that their attacks weren't working, and the demoness beside him told him not to panic, reminding them that as royal guards their main task was to eliminate this man no matter what. Rizel looked around and thought it was better not to show he was harmless, but killing the two would be a move against the Princess of Darkness. Rizel looked up, deciding it could pass as a threat, then waved his hand at the demons, making them flinch in surprise. Waving his hand, the young man formed a large seal, and set out to convince them that talking things through calmly was the best solution. In an instant, the demon and the demoness froze in amazement, and the Princess of Darkness panicked, crying out to Jack and Czarina through tears. Czarina gave a shocked sigh as a red streak of blood appeared on her neck. Rizel was busy working on the seal. In the next instant, a stream of energy surrounded the Princess of Darkness's servants, wrapped around their wounded necks and began to heal them. Czarina sighed, confused and not understanding what it had just been, while Jack touched his neck and said he was sure he had just been beheaded. The Princess of Darkness asked tearfully if they had just been reborn. Rizel said he never intended to kill them. Confused, she began talking about her servants' necks. Rizel sighed and said they were overreacting. The demons stood stunned. The man said the demons had really thought they were going to die because their head was flying through the air. The Dark Princess, pointing at the man, shouted furiously that he was the strangest person here. She said there had never been a spell that could let anyone survive after losing their head. Awkwardly, Rizel asked if getting deeper into politics had dulled their sense of magic, then let it pass by saying he did not think anyone would criticize the Princess of Darkness, and Czarina told him not to be rude because Her Majesty is the Lord of Demons and the strongest. Then the Lord himself intervened, and she closed her eyes and told Czarina to stop. Rizel listened in silence while the princess said it was clear this man was beyond their understanding. The princess told them to stop speaking like that. Czarina fell silent. Jack called out to Her Majesty. The Princess of Darkness walked up to the young man and asked Rizel to confirm that he had come here to learn about this world. The Princess of Darkness gave the man a nervous smile and agreed. She told him he could ask anything. Rizel said he was glad the girl was finally ready to talk. Czarina jumped in, insisting they still weren't convinced he wasn't the enemy and that something might happen, but the princess smiled and said they'd find out when the time came, so Czarina felt she should just give up. Anxiously, the princess's servants turned to the girl. The princess said that instead of staying here and getting more bruises, they should think about what to do to see at least a ray of hope. She figured she had attacked him first anyway, and felt he could become their ally if they talked things through. The Princess of Darkness smiled and said there was no reason to worry, so the servants should wait outside, and Rizel sighed in relief, thinking it had been a little hard, but it looked like everything would settle down now. The two Jacks exchanged glances and nodded, then bowed and said they would do as the girl wished, since her wish was their law. An awkward silence filled the room. The demon princess leaned back on her throne and crossed her legs. Smirking at Rizel, she said he could ask her anything he wanted, and he smiled politely and thanked her for the offer. Kneeling, he said he had heard the human race was about to be dominated by a rapidly growing demon race and asked whether that was true. The demon princess replied calmly that it was not. Rizel stared in disbelief and asked what was wrong with those words, and the girl sighed heavily and said absolutely everything was wrong. For centuries, demons have not grown stronger, they have only weakened. They never tried to put people under their control. People are the ones who impose unfavorable conditions on demons. The demon princess pulled out a neat document tied with a rope and tossed it to Rizel, telling him to read it. Rizel caught it quickly, surprised, and asked what it was. The princess said these papers are a contract between humans and demons. Rizel felt the royal magic emanating from him. Calmly, the girl said he was holding the original papers in his hands. Rizel looked confused and asked whether she was telling the truth. The princess remained calm and said everything was exactly as she had described. He opened the paper, put on a grave expression, and began to read the contents. If someone commits a crime at the border with demons, they will be judged under human law, and people will not be held responsible if something happens to a demon while it is among them. Rizel, horrified, asked how she could have agreed to such an unreasonable contract. The girl's face darkened as she explained that a few generations ago the demon king was killed by a hero. She said the strongest demon always became the lord of demons, and when the demon king died, it was clear no one could defeat the hero. The princess warned them that if they didn't accept the terms, the hero would seize her throne and kill the girl, so she had no choice. Rizel said he understood her logic, then went quiet and watched her shaking hands as he thought deeply. Rizel could not see why he had been called here when a powerful hero was already present, so he assumed they summoned a new hero each time an old one died, but the idea had odd inconsistencies. Looking at the demon princess, he asked if he could ask her something. She sat up and asked what he wanted to know. Rizel glanced briefly at the princess and asked if the hero was still alive, which left the girl a little surprised. After a deep breath, she said he was alive and added she would have destroyed the contract already if not for this hero. Rizel handed her the contract and asked why they had called him here in that case. The girl asked in disbelief whether he had been expelled earlier. He looked at her and said it was true and that he couldn't see what was wrong with it. Grinning, the princess said luck had been on Razel's side because he had barely escaped death, and the man was stunned and asked what that meant. The girl said he had been brought into this world to be used as a victim, and the young man went pale when he heard it. Silence hung over the Demon King's moonlit castle. In a blink, everything stopped for one person. The girl said coldly that people like him are called victims. The man went pale and asked what that meant, asking her to explain more. The girl covered her mouth with her hand inside. Lowering her eyes, the demon princess began her tale. The girl said it all started about 600 years ago with the very first call of the hero. She figured he probably wasn't very strong back then, and he still couldn't match the 4 heavenly kings, Jack and Zarina's parents. Razel was a little surprised that the strongest were the parents of the 2 he had shown his skills to not long ago. The girl said the heroes after that were all about equally strong, and the high-ranking people were amazed, so they named the goddess who brought the strongest heroes. Razel sighed and said it explained what had happened, finding it all extremely troublesome. The demon princess agreed, then paused and, amazed, asked whether he really knew all this himself. At that moment, Razel thought someone from this world could still make such a magical artifact, and that seemed more likely than the other ideas. He looked at her and asked whether the goddess had also helped create those magical artifacts, and the princess, a little surprised, looked down in frustration and said it was obvious. Razel thought about it and said the first hero had been much stronger than the first demon king back then, and the princess bared her teeth viciously when she heard it. After the first hero arrived, they defeated the demons and kept summoning more heroes, who in turn recruited others to fight the world's monsters and demons, but when they reached their limit, they let the first hero devour them. The girl said everything would repeat over and over, and that right now the first hero is stronger than he has ever been. She said the king had no idea the demon king might appear, so they created their strongest hero to support Razel, and that was not hard to imagine. The demon princess took a deep breath, lifted her head, and leaned back on the throne. The girl said this was all the information she had. Razel paused, then said he understood everything. If that was true, the goddess and that hero were his enemies. He had come here so the goddess would grant him a favor. He knew this woman intended to sacrifice her assistant, so that option was no longer available. A man stood up and asked the princess if he could verify her story. The girl looked briefly confused, then quickly composed herself and said she did not mind. Razel raised his hand, and a neat information window appeared almost immediately as he prepared to collect evidence with satellite analysis. The girl watched the strange force closely, thinking it looked like detection magic, but having no idea what he was trying to do with it. Just then, neatly marked paths appeared on the Razel screen. He noticed their souls no longer looked human at all. Quietly, he said he had found traces of a magical artifact and the first hero inside the palace, which clearly proves the demon princess was right. Surprise hit her hard. She asked what it meant and how he had even managed to scout what was happening in the palace. It was astonishing. Calmly, Razel turned and said it would be easy if she had everything she needed to perform the analysis. The princess sank back on the throne and said it was very good, then casually added she would like them to have something like that too, and the girl was amazed that Razel had absolutely no obstacles. Pouting, the girl said she had felt from the very beginning that he didn't need her at all and asked if that was the case. Razel said calmly that this was exactly the case, but if not for her, he would not have believed the first hero could still be in the palace. Looking away, he said he would never have known he was going to be a victim. Razel smiled and sincerely thanked the princess for telling him about it. She blushed and looked away, then said these were just small things. Razel was deep in thought. If he met the goddess, he could convince her she had no choice but to send him back to his world. He knew this was the best way to make this terrible man worry. At first he thought the first hero could be used as a hostage, but then realized it would not help the Princess of Darkness and suddenly let out a loud gasp, saying he understood everything. Razel turned to the princess with a firm motion. The abruptness left her confused, and she loudly asked what was wrong and what he wanted. He grinned slightly and asked if she would like to defeat the first hero herself. The girl froze on the spot. The princess believed this man had started a similar pact that led to the murder of his ancestors. Destroying him was her lifelong goal. As a descendant of all previous lords, she could not pass up the chance. The princess looked at him with a serious expression. She answered firmly that she did want to. Razel smiled and said that settled everything. The man asked the woman if she liked the idea he offered and said he would teach her personally. The princess was very confused by this. Razel also said he guarantees she will surpass the hero's strength. She pouted slightly and awkwardly asked why he was going so far. With his eyes closed, Razel told the girl he only wanted to return to his world and that he would need to make some decisions to do it. Startled, the Princess of Darkness told the man this was true and that he also had a purpose, and the girl awkwardly asked where he got the idea that she would become stronger than the hero, which took him by surprise. Razel told the girl their strength was 1/5 of his, and he meant that this level could be reached with some effort. The girl looked at the man doubtfully and said 1/5 sounded difficult. Razel stood up and asked whether she was the strongest of her people. The man said that if she studied, everything would work out, and Razel smiled, adding it would get easier once the girl learned her weaknesses, which made the princess mutter something thoughtful in reply. Standing up, the girl walked toward the guy and said that if he insisted she had agreed, she was determined. Smiling, Razel looked at the princess and noticed she was deliberately approaching the situation. When the Princess of Darkness and the hero shook hands, the girl said she was happy to cooperate. The man explained they would use a teleporter so she should be ready, and the nervous princess asked for clarification and then asked them not to use it. She clutched her face in panic. At that moment, Razel asked her if she knew anywhere she could practice. That brought her back to her senses. Razel said he wanted to see what the girl could do, and the princess thought before replying that there was a square a few kilometers away. The man opened the map in front of her. She pointed to a spot and said it was somewhere here, and Razel spoke the words he hoped would get them in. Razel put his arm around the girl's shoulder and told her to hold on tight. The princess looked at him, and with a little excitement, asked if they would really fly that far. Razel smiled and said that everything was correct. A large seal formed under the princess and the hero's feet. She cried that she wasn't mentally ready. Their bodies began to dissolve, and the particles rushed toward the right place. The princess screamed loudly. Eventually, they reached the designated spot, which was almost empty. The Princess of Darkness could barely hold on, bent over and breathing hard with her head down. Exhausted, the girl felt it had been a real nightmare, and the magic amazed her because they flew this distance at once, while Razel gave her an awkward, apologetic look. The princess sat up, replied in a haggard voice that nothing was wrong, and asked the man what kind of thing it was. Razel told the princess it was a magical barrier, a mirage. The girl, confused, asked what that was. The man smiled and said from outside it only looked like they were doing exercises. She grew more confused and still did not understand him. Grinning, the man told the princess that however ashamed she felt no one would see it, so she could relax, and she grudgingly thanked him for his care, thinking this was what he had come up with. Razel said he thought the girl was ready for battle, and the princess looked slightly surprised before turning and saying yes. The Princess of Darkness looked confidently at the relaxed man and said they would fight at full strength this time. Razel smiled and said they could start the fight, and the girl looked resolutely at the hero in front of her. Getting ready, she pictured how the man might attack, resolved to stop him, then let herself consider that it might be better to skip the attack. Suddenly, the man who had been standing before the princess vanished, leaving the girl confused as she opened her eyes, stunned, and asked if the young man was gone. The Princess of Darkness stood and sensed magic all around her, as if a dispelling spell filled the air, making an attack at an unknown point useless, so she decided to concentrate because even if distracted, there was still a place with stronger magic. Suddenly, her eyes flew open, and she clicked her teeth in displeasure when she noticed something. The girl spun around and cast a spell, shouting that he was here. At the same time, a small stone struck the princess's head, and she cried out softly. Her eyes fell on the stone nearby as she wondered what it was. Looking closer, the girl realized it was just an ordinary ball. She touched her head, feeling a sharp pain. Then Razel appeared behind her, said the ball disappears after 3 seconds, and told her to try to dodge him. The princess spun around, sure it was telepathy, and Razor grinned and said he had only used amplification, leaving her very surprised. Clenching her fist in indignation, she watched Razel smile, say he had expected something interesting from her, and cheer her on because it sounded good right now, while she thought with displeasure that she would kill him. Angry, the dark princess bared her teeth and insisted she could dodge, while Razel smiled and quickly slipped past her. Then the ball struck her head again and she screamed. Much time had passed since training began. The sun was slowly setting over the horizon, and the princess quickly blocked the ball coming at her. Sweating heavily and exhausted, the girl thought about how she had managed to defend herself. At that moment, the man praised the princess, and Razel told her to try to attack now, which surprised her greatly. The Princess of Darkness watched the man and decided it was time to attack, but when she tried to track his movements, she realized her eyesight had not adjusted yet, and although he slowed down, that did not make her feel any better. She relaxed and exhaled fully. The girl thought she would have to try something else. Razel noticed something right away. The dark princess spread her arms wide and closed her eyes, surrounded by many seals. Razel glanced at it and assumed they were fire arrows. Cursing under his breath, he raised another barrier just to be safe. the man spun around and clicked his tongue in annoyance. Gathering her strength, the Princess of Darkness quickly launched a sideways attack while screaming for her to hit. Breathing hard, the girl still smiled and asked the guy how he felt. Razel looked very confused as fragments fell beside him, and the guy turned, stunned to see a huge hole where his barrier had been destroyed. The girl was breathing heavily, and the princess smiled broadly and said joyfully that she had finally succeeded. Right after that, the girl collapsed to the ground, saying she was tired. The barrier kept crumbling. Razel wondered whether she thought his defenses were so weak that he could not stand up for himself. Creating the magical barrier invented by ancient magicians will take a little more effort, but he will not show weakness or inexperience, so he must give his best to prove his magical skill. As the girl tried to catch her breath, the man came up and offered his hand, a gesture that surprised the Princess of Darkness. Accepting his help, she smiled at Razel and asked to start. The man wondered what limit the Princess of Darkness had. He matched her smile and said that since she insisted, he agreed. Razel spoke the words and a moving barrier began at once. Startled, the princess cut him off. Exhausted, she shouted that she needed to rest again. They rested for a while. The girl turned to the guy and asked what kind of barrier he meant. Razel said he would make a small dome, and the girl had to destroy it with magic. The girl looked at the man defiantly and demanded to know about the small dome, accusing him of doubting she could, while Razel formed a barrier around himself and said she would prove it to him. A dome surrounded Riza. He smiled at the girl and said the barrier blocks any magical attacks. The Princess of Darkness smiled broadly, sure he had been too bold, and said she would take his words into account. Creating a huge seal, she said in a menacing tone that the man had underestimated her strength. The Princess of Darkness immediately launched a powerful attack directly at the man surrounded by a barrier. Her attack hit the barrier but couldn't touch him, and she asked in shock whether the barrier really blocked magic. The girl stood silently in front of the guy and watched as he did not even react to her attack. Razel removed the protection and asked the girl if she really thought he was joking, and the girl, annoyed, called back asking why he had become so brave, saying it was no big deal since she couldn't do it the first time. The Princess of Darkness turned away, dejected, when the man called to her and told her not to sulk. The man looked confused by her behavior. With tears in her eyes, the princess asked what he wanted. Razel hesitated awkwardly, then apologized and told the girl he still did not know her name. The Princess of Darkness, displeased, told him he had only decided to find out now. Agreeing, the girl admitted it was her fault too. Introducing herself as Mercia, the Princess of Darkness, she thanked the guy for volunteering to help her. Razel shyly thanked the girl for trusting him because he was very pleased. He said they should switch to merciless skills if they were serious. He said the girl's magic power was very high, but her technique was clearly poor, so her attacks were weak at the exit. Confused, she said she didn't understand and asked him to explain it more simply. Razel asked them to picture Mercy's magic as a pump. The force's power is the hose thickness, and the technique is the water pressure. At the outlet, it can have high or low pressure. The magic circle is her skill. Razel hoped this made it clear why she couldn't attack. The girl agreed. Using a man and a dragon as an example, the dragon is clearly stronger at first, so victory seems obvious. But if you improve your magic a little, the human can turn the tide, and a proper attack will topple the dragon, so the man becomes the undisputed strongest magician. Razel said the girl needed training to learn how to distribute her magic properly and focus on the target, and he would teach her everything so she could defeat the most powerful demon, and the girl said she was ready and asked what she needed. The man told Mercia they would first learn to create a three-dimensional magic dome. The princess eagerly repeated what the man said. Razel thought he would have to work hard. Razel also noticed the girl still did not know something. Razel explained that magic domes can take different shapes, from a flat, weak dome to a three-dimensional dome of infinite strength that he would teach her to make, meaning merciless magic would become three-dimensional. The princess realized she could hardly imagine this was a whole science, asked the man if that meant her skills would grow without limit, and Razel replied, satisfied, that she was right. Mercia asked skeptically how she could retrain so quickly and learn to create such a dome, and whether the man could somehow shorten their course of study. Razel said he'd have to practice a bit, since, as Mercia knew, he wasn't born knowing this magic, and it had taken him a long time to get it right, and Mercia said she wasn't willing to wait that long and called him boring. She said she'd ask him a question then. The girl asked what had made him agree to train her. Mercia said the guy's goal was completely different. To return to his world, she asked why they couldn't just kill the hero and get what they needed. She wondered why they would complicate the training. Rise will agree. He said she was right and gave two reasons. First, the information he can get, and second, that she might see him as grateful for letting him see the truth. then he added something else. Razel said he wanted the girl to join him as an adventurer in his world after their victory. The Princess of Darkness was surprised. He said he would give her time to think about his proposal, and Mercia called to him in confusion, asking what it meant. Razel said one enemy in his world is very hard to beat and his strength is not enough, so if they join forces they might have a chance to defeat him. A man helps a woman, and she returns the favor. It's simple, and Mercier asked if he intended to defeat a creature twice his strength. It had seemed impossible, but Razel turned to the girl and said that after seeing her determination and perseverance, he realized they had a chance. This would take a lot of training, he said, so he told the girl they should not waste their precious time, and Mercier agreed and invited the man to start. Mercy declared she would become the best magician and that others would see it later. She planned to learn how to create a three-dimensional dome. Her power would become limitless. They would defeat all their enemies and help each other gain strength and find the truth. Razel liked the girl's attitude and said it was great. The girl then asked if she could ask something else. The guy, surprised, asked what it was about. Mercia said her younger sister is just as strong as she is. Not long ago, Mercia fell ill with a mysterious disease and grew weak. If she must leave the kingdom to go to another world with a man, she wants her sister to become the next Princess of Darkness. Unable to fight like before, she is still unmatched at ruling. The girl said maybe in the guy's world, they could find an antidote to cure her sister and restore her former strength, and Razel admitted he was no good at medicine and thought about the mysterious disease. He replied that he agreed to help Mercy and would do everything possible to find an antidote for her. Joyfully, the princess asked if it was true. She thanked him warmly. Setting off, she asked Razel why he had gotten up and said they should return to the castle immediately because she wanted to tell her sister right away, and Razel agreed and asked her to avoid strong drinks this time like last time, and she awkwardly said she did not drink at all. It was already the middle of the night outside, and the moon hung above the horizon. Reading a book on the couch, a girl was startled when a portal suddenly appeared in the room in front of her. Frightened by the warped space, she thought they were going to attack. Then Mercia and Razel appeared. The man apologized for taking so long, and she called to her younger sister with relief. Mercia sank to the floor and apologized for scaring the girl, and the little sister said not to worry because she had not recognized her sister's magic. Then the girl asked who the man was, and Mercia smiled, certain the girl would be surprised. The Princess of Darkness said the man's name is Razel, and that he is one of the strongest warriors from another world, able to defeat and neutralize her magic instantly and even get past the barrier, while the girl said one of his spells could take her by surprise, and overall he is an extraordinary magician and warrior. Razel asked the girl whether she was exaggerating. Mercia replied awkwardly that it was only a little. The girl looked at him and sighed, saying he was truly a unique person. Mercia took her sister's hands and said she had brought him here hoping he could cure her. Her sister was surprised by why the young man had come. The princess repeated herself and told the girl not to worry, assuring her everything would be fine and that even if the guy couldn't help, they would keep fighting with a smile, so the girl should just give him a chance to try to heal her. The princess's younger sister said hesitantly that if a girl trusts a man, she certainly would not mind. Razel smiled at the sisters, seeing how much they trusted each other and how strong their bond was, and Mercia then called the man's name and asked him to come over, and he agreed, saying he would not delay. A young man crouched before the girl and greeted her, saying he was very pleased to meet her and that she should not be nervous because he would not hurt her. The girl thanked him and said she trusted him completely. The princess asked him to be careful with her sister because her sister was more receptive than she was. Razel said he understood. Mercia frowned at how clever the man was. The girl asked the man what kind of illness her sister had, then eagerly asked whether it was caused by a magical impulse. Razel explained that because her small body was overloaded with magical power, it could not withstand the flow of energy. He said this is why her magic and health are so unstable. The man listened closely, and the girl asked if it was a serious illness. The man told her not to worry and said there was an antidote that could boost the flow's concentration so her strength would return to normal. The medicine was made specifically to suppress energy and improve health, and she would have to wait a few days for it to take effect. He told Mercia the pill would stay in her system for life. Mercia was amazed. She asked if that was true. He gave her a capsule of medicine and told her to swallow it. She agreed. Excited, she looked at the girl and called out, and Mercy smiled and reassured her that everything was fine because they trusted the guy. The princess's younger sister nodded, then quickly put the medicine in her mouth and swallowed it. The girl exhaled calmly. Mercia quickly asked if the medicine had started to work. The princess's sister said nothing had changed. Mercy started shouting at the man, demanding to know why it wasn't helping and whether the pill was expired. He covered his ears and kept saying the pill would only take effect in a couple of days. He reminded them it would take several days for the drug to fully work. The man said he'd have to wait a bit. The girl, confused, said everything was fine. Razel touched the stone on the girl's forehead with his finger and said they should give the medicine for exactly a week. The girl agreed with him. The princess's sister looked at her hands in surprise and asked what it was. The princess said her flow of power had become much calmer and that she could feel it. Mercia said it was amazing, and the girl agreed with her sister. Mercia hugged her little sister with tears in her eyes and said she would now definitely be cured. Her sister agreed happily, and Razel smiled, thinking they had solved this problem too. She stared at her hands, hesitated briefly, then said firmly they could start. Mercia was nervous too and only agreed with her sister. Razel watched in silence. Pouring her magic into the vase, the girl made it crumble into its components, and delighted she said it had worked and that she could do it while Mercia watched in amazement as her little sister separated the vase's alloy into different minerals. Smiling, Razel said even the most difficult spells would now be easy for her. Smiling broadly, the girl said it was just wonderful because now she will be able to handle simple magic. Mercier burst into tears and said it was wonderful, and because her little sister could cure her terrible illness, the girl wiped the princess's tears, said it was true, and asked her sister to calm down a little. Rysel also said the mushy mass of magic that caused Shishiel's disease is unlike anything else, but if you use this medicine, you will earn gratitude from people or magical forces, and Mercia looked at him and asked what might happen next. The man smiled and said he had eaten, and to put it another way, they must give this medicine to every soldier to strengthen the army. Mercy looked at him, confused, and asked whether they could produce this medicine in large quantities. The man admitted that when this medicine first went on sale, it was distributed to children in poor countries, and the manufacturer made too many units in the first batch, so now it is very widespread, and the girl asked if it was the disposal of stocks. Grinning, the princess said that whether ruined or not, something could still be used. Razel smiled at her and said that suited her best. Mercier said happily that they needed to place the people immediately because she would arrive very soon. Rezel and Shishiel were left alone. The girl asked if he wanted to move closer to his sister. The man thought it over and took a deep breath, but she cut him off to say it was very difficult, which made him look up in surprise. Her sister was indeed the most influential person in the country, and others trusted her, she said. The girl added that she was worse at that than Mercia. Razel wanted to answer, but she said that was the way it was. He was taken aback and the girl smiled broadly, saying that despite this, if he truly needed a sister and Mercia wanted it, she would stop at nothing. She smiled broadly and said she would do absolutely everything for her sister. Razel fixed his gaze and smiled gently, saying he was counting on the girl for this. He asked Shishiel if she had any political experience, and she, surprised, laughed awkwardly and said she was deeply ashamed because she had none. Razel sipped her tea and said she should use it, while he handed her the papers and explained that whenever she wanted to learn, she could draw on professionals' knowledge in the field to become an expert, and this is the so-called educational A simulator. When the conversation ended, an awkward silence settled, and the men stared at each other until Mercier came in smiling and said she was back and that everything had been handed out correctly. Shashia looked at her sister and awkwardly greeted Mercia, the Princess of Darkness, who hesitated and asked whether anything had happened while she was away. Razel grabbed her shoulder and told her she was already back. The girl turned pale. He sank onto the couch and said he needed to extract some of her memories. She looked briefly confused, then agreed without much thought. Calmly the girl sat and waited for Razel's next move. When she understood him, she asked loudly what it meant and what he intended to take from her memory. Razel said she had to stay calm and avoid losing consciousness. All her practical experience will be recorded in this educational simulator. In short, she said it was a magical tool that draws on her memory to create educational materials, and Mercia asked if that was true. Razel took out a few items and told her she was right. The girl placed the object in her hair and said she had been able to until now. Now she did not understand what was really happening. Razel asked if she was ready to experience the difference between the worlds. Mercia said everything was fine because she could handle it. Razel smiled and told the girl she was well prepared. He touched the object, said that in that case they should start, and received a notification that magic memory crystals had been added to his equipment. The girl focused. The girl heard she could have everything. At that moment, something began to enter her consciousness. Shashil grew visibly nervous as she looked at her sister. She suddenly heard the Earth and Demon Control simulator installation was complete. The girl took the device from her hair and asked if that was everything. Razel confirmed he was finished and asked her to try it once. Shishiel looked confused but said she understood when Razel told her to click the red magic stone in the center, and at that moment, her image appeared on the screen, surprising her. The system said they should explain how the current situation is coping and offer a brief thought, and they saw it mention the famine 2 years ago, so they need to choose a 3 on Training Street. Surprised, Shishiel said she could not really predict how the situation would improve and decided to try switching to the number 2 mode, while Mercia watched in silence. The system said this was the correct answer, and she was very happy to be able to, adding that choosing 2 will work well. Mercia proudly declared she had carried out the regime, and Shishiel admired it as exactly what she expected from her sister, leaving Mercia proud of herself. Razel came over and said the stimulant was very good. She added that he was being very helpful. The girl looked at the princess and said she would try now and continue trying afterward. Mercia patted the girl's head and said she was counting on her. They were very happy. The next day the guys got together. Razel announced the second part of her training would start now so she could surpass the daredevil she had met. He asked if she was in good shape, and the girl said she was in perfect shape and was counting on him. The girl said her room would be needed for training, and the man quickly agreed. This time he told her to use the device to release the magical energy, and she asked what it was while watching the statuette on the table. Razel said this device drains magical energy from the area and leaves only a small residual concentration. In that environment, magic drains from living beings and disintegrates, so the ambient magical concentration stays constant. Mercia asked if the body would be affected. He warned that leaving it as it was would leave her with too little magic and she would die. Mercia was stunned. Razel laughed, saying it rarely comes to this and he shouldn't worry, then asked what he planned to do with the device. He said he wanted to keep the higher magic in his body and control it with his body's power. She was surprised. He does not resort to the complex magical environment when leaving the magical force, he said. Turning to light magic is usually controlled by consciousness. His advice was for her to try lighting a long-burning candle. Awkwardly, the girl said she understood and looked visibly nervous. Mercia eagerly stepped to the candle, said she was free to do so, told the man to look, and when it immediately went out, she stared in disbelief. The Princess of Darkness grew serious. Trying to cheer herself, she said that as a demon, it should be easy for her. Razel watched closely, but the candle would not light. The man smiled at her second failure, and she grew angry. Mercy stared at the candle, shouting for it to catch fire faster. At that moment, a small spark appeared on the wick, and she cried out with joy. The light went out immediately, leaving the girl very upset and pursing her lips in displeasure. Mercier shouted sadly, asking what it was all about, while the girl worried she had drained all her power casting magic and said she was not fit for the job, and Razel smiled at the princess and asked whether she was already giving up. Sitting up with a tear-streaked face, she was quiet at first, then said confidently she would keep trying until she succeeded. Razel closed his eyes, smiled, and said everything was as he had expected. Mercia threw up her hands and said she would do it. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Razel opened it and saw Shishiel in front of him. Someone had brought tea, but the man told the woman to be quiet. Shishiel entered the room and followed the man's gesture. Her sister was fully focused on training. Suddenly, Mercia clutched her head and screamed in frustration, while Razel and Shishiel simply smiled at the sight. The princess's younger sister quickly handed the tea tray to the man, who looked puzzled, then went into the room herself. Upset by the failure, Mercia suddenly noticed a little sister standing in front of her and looking at her warmly. Each sister began her practice, and Razel carried a tray with the tea the girl had left for him. Some time later, the candle the princess was holding caught fire. Mercier looked at her with delight and quiet surprise. Shishiel and Razel were also surprised. Triumphant, the princess rushed to hug her little sister with a joyful cry. Razel looked at her thoughtfully and said it was not bad for a first try. The magic had not leaked and the fire had not gone out, and Mercy cheerfully repeated that she would not give up. Inside, the princess collapsed onto the table and said she was exhausted. Razel replied that since she could handle it, they would slowly raise the difficulty of the spells. The man said she could bring up using attacking magic at any time. Soon the girl will be able to transfer to the competition arena using movement magic. Mercia replied that her first goal was to learn unconsciousness magic. Shishiel said happily that the girl would definitely be moved next time. Mercia added that the girl had really become stronger. Sometime later, the guys returned to the competition arena where the girl was training. Mercy folded her arms and slowly gathered energy between them, which swelled to a large size as Razel watched. The man looked at the energy bundle and told the girl it would do. Mercia released the gathered energy and it quickly dissipated. Smiling, she said it was great. The girl praised her, saying she had done a good job and that the appearance and disappearance were perfect. Razel said the girl was doing well because she reached this level in under a month. Razel decided he could stop the device now. Mercier looked at the man and asked if they should test the use of magic now that the goal had been met. Razel smiled at the princess and said he had just been thinking about it. Then he told the interested girl what her current training would be. A barrier started to form at the man's feet. A protective wall started to rise in front of Razel. He looked at the girl and spoke the words that would create three-dimensional magical barriers. Mercia looked at him in surprise and repeated that these would be three-dimensional magical barriers. Razel told the princess their base is on the surface. They are called multi-layered. The girl asked if these were protective magical barriers. It was true that overlapping two-dimensional magical barriers create three-dimensional ones. He explained that in reality, three-dimensional magical barriers must form instantly. He added that building the pieces takes time because they collapse at the slightest breeze. He gave Mercia a defiant look and asked if she could handle it. Mercia returned that smile to reassure him. The girl believed that if she tried, she would succeed. Those thoughts kept repeating in her mind. Mercia focused and began to form a barrier. Small pieces quickly came together into a tall wall, and Razel saw the girl's intense focus and precise building were flawless. After a few moments, Mercier said happily what she could. Razel replied that it was not bad, especially for a start. The girl added with satisfaction that it was exactly right, since she is the Princess of Darkness. At that moment, the man turned to the princess and asked her to test her barrier's strength, and she was very surprised. A powerful explosion behind the wall beside her made her scream, and when the smoke cleared, Mercier, surprised, asked if he had really protected her. Mercia touched the barrier and said there wasn't a single scratch on it. Razel explained that multi-layered magic barriers are stronger than two-dimensional ones. The man asked the woman if she could feel this horror. The princess said the magical barrier was gorgeous and felt a seething certainty she had created the strong barrier herself, and Rise will reply that their goal was three-dimensional magic barriers, so they should increase the number of layers. Smiling enthusiastically, Mercia said it was great and they should do it then. She happily told Razel to look at the powerful magical barrier she had formed. The man said she was doing well, and the barrier could easily withstand an attack. Mercia fell to the floor saying she had done it, and was delighted by how cool it looked. Mercia lay on the floor and, weary, said it turned out to require a lot of concentration. Razel held out his hand to the girl and told her she had done a great job. Looking at the girl, he said that starting tomorrow they would begin serious study of three-dimensional magic cubes and magic manipulation with her, added that the princess should rest for now, and the girl stood up inside. Confidently, she said she did not need rest because there was no time to relax, and insisted she should learn the basics of magic as soon as possible, and Razel understood and said that was to be expected from a girl. Razel grinned and told Mercy to remember that he would be very strict with her afterward. The princess said she understood everything, then she asked him to hurry. Sometime later, Razel approached the girl and told her Mercia had mentioned a special place where she wanted to continue training, then asked if this was it, and the girl smiled and confirmed it. Smiling at the view in front of them, the Princess of Darkness said this was a food warehouse beside the Demon Kingdom in a large plantation, and that the landscape here was beautiful. Maintaining the large territory that supplies the kingdom with agricultural products is difficult because it rarely rains, so higher-ranking demons send rain to the plantations once or twice a year to sustain the fields and crops. Surprised, Razel spoke about how much precipitation a territory like that needs. That explained to him why the girl chose to hold training on these lands. Closing his eyes, he smiled and said this wasn't the only reason Mercia had brought him here. He asked if that was true and if she had anything more to say. Mercia wanted to use a multi-layered magic barrier to create rain and irrigate the fields herself. A surprised man asked whether she had developed the method, and although everything she said was true, it would be her first time using the magic in practice, so she was unsure. Razel realized the girl wanted him to back her up. Mercy said she was only afraid something might go wrong, and that instead of rain, she could trigger an explosion that would endanger the kingdom. Mercia felt deeply embarrassed, and Razel admired how hard Mercia had trained to create a magic barrier, because the princess wanted to help her people. Razel suggested they first practice creating a simple magic barrier, then move on to the rain, and Mercia agreed happily. As the princess formed a barrier, Razel inspected everything closely and said he believes this formula, which increases crops by stimulating growth and stabilizing nutrients, could cause precipitation. The man suggested Mercia draw a simple circle for now and then slowly start entering her formula. He said that if anything went wrong, he would tell them at once and they would stop training. The girl quickly agreed. Mercia calmed herself and concentrated, reminding herself to focus. Razel watched as rings of energy quickly formed around the princess and was sure she could build a barrier and control the magic. Razel thought making a magic circle was a frightening skill. He told the girl it had turned out well. A man suggested trying to run it with magic. Mercia quickly said she understood. Slowly, the Princess of Darkness revealed her powers, and her circle of power expanded until it became enormous. Suddenly, a few drops of rain hit the ground, and the falling water immediately drew the attention of nearby residents. The crowd began shouting that it was the blessed rain of the Princess of Darkness. Many noticed the magic circle was much larger this year. They thanked the princess loudly. The girl smiled and said she could. Mercia noticed something and quickly turned to the man to ask what had happened. Razel smiled and said it was perfect. The man said this year's harvest will be bigger than usual. Inside, the girl fell to the floor. The Princess of Darkness had tears in her eyes, and the girl said it was good. Razel believed she never cried, even during tough training. Mercy began saying they wouldn't have to rely on humans anymore. She felt ashamed for crying in front of a man. The man cried out in surprise. Razel, confused, asked whether there really had been plagiarism, and despite the food supply, he also wanted to know when the delivery would end, while Mercia replied in disbelief that they had to copy them to feed themselves. Razel felt relieved, thinking that if he had been even a little late it would have been worse, so he said he understood, and the girl said that this year the Lord is on their side. Mercia lifted her head and declared the people would no longer starve. She gazed calmly at the sky, while the man said the harvest would be good. Smugly, the princess said she wanted to see the faces of the merchants who export humans. Razel, confused, agreed. A long time had passed, and in the royal capital, the Lily were minding their own business when someone, clearly displeased, let out a questioning sigh while clutching a paper. Deeply displeased, the king demanded to know what kind of pathetic sales these were, referring to a 95% drop in crop exports. The second man, frightened, asked what it meant, and the man threw a paper at his feet, calling it nonsense. Shouting, the king demanded to know what was going on. The second man cowered in fear and hesitated. Recently, when the number of merchants fell, he went directly to the demon diplomat with a request. The diplomat said the demon's food self-sufficiency had exceeded 100%, and they no longer needed to import humans from now on. The king's deeper sigh showed his displeasure and made the employee fear things would continue unchanged. And remembering that an official had once been executed for insulting the king, he realized he was in a dangerous position. After saying the demon's arrogance had no limits, the king turned to Regis and asked if the 3 summoned heroes were equipped. Regis replied they were ready. The king ordered him to command the summoned heroes to storm the demon lord's castle. Regis stared at the king in surprise, seeking clarification. The king ordered them to kill the demon lord and add a clause to the contract requiring the demon tribe to permanently buy the same amount of harvest as last year. Regis turned to the king and with all due respect said that, as you know, the summoned heroes could not defeat the demon lord in their current state, and the king, pleased, replied that he understood perfectly. The king remembered Article 7, Paragraph 3, which said the demon tribes could not kill the summoned heroes. Regis was slightly shocked and said it was the right thing to do. The king announced that the demon tribe had broken the treaty and killed the summoned heroes, and this would lead to an all-out war between humans and demons, while Regis replied that the dead summoned heroes could no longer be used for synthesis. The man told the servant the demons were causing trouble and ordered them destroyed first, saying he did not care if 1 or 2 summoned heroes died, and Regis bowed and apologized. Frowning, the king waved his hand and said that since they understood they could leave. Regis agreed and asked for forgiveness. The employee also apologized, exhaling with relief. The man examined the scroll next to him and talked about how stupid the demons were. Not knowing their tactics, he resolved to make sure they knew not to oppose the human race. Walking down the corridor, the man suddenly heard someone talking about an attack on the king's castle. He stepped closer and asked if this was the right room, thinking he had just heard something about the demon lord's castle, then leaned against the door, admitting eavesdropping wasn't his strong suit. The man heard the king order the heroes to be summoned and killed, then sent to synthesis to start an all-out war between the human race and the demon tribe, and he assumed the heroes were being used. Walking down the corridor, he denied it all and believed that if he wanted to kill them, he would have done it long ago. Banzas stopped abruptly and seriously considered that the king might really want to kill them. He cut off the stream of thoughts, smiled faintly, and decided he was overthinking it. Meanwhile, wind swept across the vast desert. Mercy has again said that there really is nothing in this wilderness. The Princess of Darkness asked Graysel if he wanted to hold a fight here, and Graysel said they had made great progress over the past 6 months, were already cramped in their usual arena, and no settlements or buildings had been found here. Razel smiled at the girl and asked whether it was time for her to use her full strength, and Mercia paused briefly and said she understood. The man suggested the princess arrange a fight without any of these restrictions. Mercia agreed and said they should give their best this time. A circle of light appeared under the girl's feet, weapons formed behind her, and she thrust a magic spear toward the man. Spears flew at Razel, revealing they were magical, so ordinary defenses would not hold, and he formed a hard shell to protect himself from them. The Dark Princess smiled and said that if the man acted that way, he would get what he deserved. She attacked him again. Razel saw it as self-inflicted pain and decided to use a magnetic counter. The girl's attack struck the man, then quickly returned to her. Mercia, shocked, asked what it was. Panicking, she said this could not be. Putting mercy and displeasure aside, she dodged quickly, cursed inwardly, and exhaled in relief when she avoided the attack. Razel smiled and asked whether it was a good idea. He decided it was time to fight back. A dark fog closed in around Mercia, leaving her stunned. She covered her face quickly, assuming it was a neurotoxic mist. She coughed softly, and the man agreed with her, sure it was exactly like that. Razel thought the girl could use the same antidote magic he used. Still, the Princess of Darkness smiled as she gathered a ball of energy in her hands. Razel realized with shock that it was more than an antidote. Mercia aimed her attack straight at the man, shouting for him to disappear. Razel was immediately surrounded by her strength. The Princess of Darkness looked at the man in surprise and asked what it was. Razel smiled and asked if this was really all the girl had. He noticed there was not a scratch on it. Mercia, clearly confused, asked how it had happened. She was bewildered. The girl asked the guy whether there were any protective spells on him. Razel grinned and offered to check his magic circle. Mercy showed displeasure, then suddenly realized something and screamed. She shouted that she had lost her target designation and that it was unfair. Razel answered with an awkward smile that the magic can easily rewrite the target. A man laughed and said it was unsuitable for fighting people because they could become the target. Grabbing her head in outrage, Mercia screamed that she had rushed into such a big move and made a mistake. Razel added that it is impossible to forge a magic circle against the hero, which proved effective and made the girl calm down a little. Razel moved toward her and said that waiting to strike with quick magic while preparing slow, behind-the-scenes spells would lead to his defeat, and from a strategic point of view, it was almost ideal. Smiling, the man said that if the girl was careful enough she would win, added that Mercia did well this time, and the girl agreed happily. The Princess of Darkness smiled and said she would try her best, then slammed her fist into his. Afterward, Mercia decided to have a snack, turned to the man and said she liked the workout, which surprised him, so he asked if she meant it, and she confirmed she did. She said it motivates her to try new things, especially protective magic. Razel smiled and said he was glad to hear that. The man said he worried the girl might burn out when she reached her goal. Mercia said she hadn't known he was worried about it. The Princess of Darkness said happily she would be Razel's friend and that she kept her word, and the man agreed, believing his former comrades were different. Razel said this sandwich is very tasty. The girl smiled and said she and Jack had cooked it. The man was shocked that a demon could cook. Mercia said the demon was one of the best in the castle. Razel said he understood and thought appearances can be deceptive. Mercia stretched wearily, and Razel said it was over and they were going home now. Suddenly a huge shadow fell over the man and the woman, making them look up in confusion. A huge mouth and eyes loomed in front of them as the dragon angrily asked if they were truly disturbing his sleep. The Dark Princess stared at the monster in disbelief, shouting that it was a dragon. Perplexed, Razel asked whether the girl knew what they were like. Mercia, annoyed, asked the guy if he was a fool. She replied that of course that was not the case. She said she had never even seen him in person. The guy awkwardly replied that that's how it turns out. Mercia said the dragon closely resembled the dragons from the legends. The guy asked her about the legends. The princess said seriously that about 10,000 years ago the civilization here was destroyed by a dragon. She said those lucky enough to survive the dragon's storm restored peace and remain his descendants to this day, adding that this holds as long as they do not disturb the dragon's sleep. Mercia said that the dragon's name was the Sleeping Dragon of Antiquity. The Princess of Darkness stared at the dragon and warned that they had awakened something terrible, and Razel sighed thoughtfully after her words. The man replied seriously that this was a bad idea. He said he did not want to be woken up. She was shocked by his response. Razel asked excitedly what they could use to put the dragon to sleep again. Mercy asked if the man was stupid and said maybe they weren't joking, and at that moment, a dragon interrupted them with a menacing growl. The dragon grudgingly asked the couple what they were whispering about, called them little demons, and told them they should only look at it because it was disrespectful to him. Unaware, he shouted that they would regret their influence. The dragon began gathering energy for a powerful attack. Remembering Razel's words, Mercia quickly activated the absorption barrier. The dragon struck at them instantly. When the smoke cleared, the Princess of Darkness was surprised and announced it was working. The dragon was stunned by what had just happened. Razel smiled at the girl and said she had already surpassed the dragon's strength. Mercia stared at her hands in shock and asked if she had done it. Razel said he was sure Mercia could kill a dragon like that instantly. The girl repeated that she could kill a sleeping dragon with her bare hands. The dragon looked at them and said they had only stopped the attack by a ridiculous accident. Article 10, Paragraph 3 of the Pact of Man and the Beast states that if a sleeping dragon awakens, the heroes of the human race must kill it. And Paragraph 4 says that if Paragraph 3 is fulfilled, the demon tribe would be betrayed to the human tribe no more than at any other time. Laughing cruelly, the princess said that if they defeated this man, the terrible contract would finally be annulled. She added that she would take his body with her, let out a laugh, and said she looks very much like a demon lord right now. Grinning, he looked at the girl and said Mercia should keep going, since this alone won't prepare her to be a hero, but it will be an unforgettable first battle, and he was proud of her. Smiling, the girl said her first battle would be with a real dragon. She said no one would believe her. The dragon was furious at their arrogance. He dismissed them as just small pawns. The monster rose and roared that he would burn them all to the ground. Mercia grinned and declared she would end the dragon for the sake of the demon's future. Spreading her arms to the sides, she smiled broadly as huge spikes rose around her, then stared at the monster with cold eyes and summoned a magic spear. The dragon refused to stop, gathered a concentrated blast of fire in his mouth to kill them, and briefly said they were taking the full force of his anger. He unleashed his full strength on the people trying to kill him. Mercia kept up her attack, aiming directly at the dragon. A massive explosion rocked the area and wiped out all visibility. When the smoke and dust finally settled, the dragon's legs came into view, and moments later he collapsed to the ground, powerless. Staring at the monster's body, the girl looked around in disbelief and asked whether it was really over and whether she had won. Razel laughed nervously, surprised that Mercy's skills had grown far faster than he expected, and he also noticed the dragon itself was very weak. Right then, Mercia walked up to the monster's body and said they only needed to kill her in case she woke up again, and Razor looked at her and couldn't help but admire her courage. Stepping closer, he looked at Mercia and asked what she planned to do with the dragon's body, and Mercia answered loudly that they would use it as an important bargaining chip in any negotiations with people. Mercia crouched down a little and carefully examined the dragon's body, then asked whether that would be enough to convince them that they had killed the dragon. She asked Razel what he thought about using it to make magic tools. The girl said the dragon's material, which had lived for tens of thousands of years, would not be wasted, and asked whether that was true. Razel reflected on her words about the material. A sudden loud gasp escaped him as he said he remembered everything. He realized it was true. Mercy turned to him and asked what had happened. When it seemed he might have an idea, he grinned and said everything was fine. Mercia brightened immediately and looked at the man, asking what it was and urging him to explain it right away. Razel smiled warmly and told her not to hurry. He said he would need her help and would tell her everything, then began his short story. Night had fallen, the moon had risen, and the Demon King's castle had grown noisy. Surprised, she looked at the object and asked whether it was really a gift. The girl said it was great, but did not understand at all why they had suddenly decided to give her something. Mercier said proudly that the girl had to accept the gift first and then say something. Razel gave an awkward sigh in agreement. A weapon appeared in the air, and she looked at it admiringly. She asked what it was. Razel said it was a magic sword made from materials taken from the sleeping dragon. He said that when she channels her magic into the sword, it creates a stored magic circle that activates, and because it is charged with mercy magic circles, only blood relatives can use it. This sword is a unique weapon that only she can use. The girl jumped up and said loudly that she could not accept such a valuable item, adding that she could not handle such a powerful weapon on her own. Mercia drew a deep breath and said her sister's name, looking very serious as she addressed the younger girl. Smiling warmly at her sister, she said that even if she defeated the current heroes, there was no guarantee a second or third would not appear. Shishiel stared at her sister in silence. After a short pause, she hesitated and asked whether she would really defeat other heroes instead of Mercia. At that moment, she felt a little insecure and realized it was true she would have to fight when Mercia was away. She gripped her weapon tightly and looked ahead with confidence, knowing she had to make decisions. The girl said she understands, and if so she will be very grateful to them. Smiling warmly, she said she wasn't very good at using it. The girl added she would put this sword in the magic vault. Razel smiled and said he hadn't been the one to kill the dragon this time. Shishiel was very surprised and asked what it meant. Then she realized everything and looked at her sister to see if her thought was right, and Mercy smiled proudly and said it was exactly like that and that she had killed the sleeping dragon. Shishiel gasped with admiration and said it was wonderful, feeling even prouder. Mercy raised her head and said it was exactly like that. At the moment of glory, Razel said quietly that the princess had been very scared from the start. The girl turned angrily and said she had heard everything clearly. She looks at the men in disbelief and asks if all the dragon material was used to make this sword, then waits for an answer. Mercy aloud, Lee said they still had some surplus left, so they were going to have a big feast soon. Shishiel reacted immediately, calling the dragon meat banquet too extravagant, but she still looked very happy. Mercy shook her head and suggested the boys invite the castle servants to join the feast. Shishiel smiled and said the castle staff would help cook the dragon meat. Mercy added that they should leave the butchering to Rasola. Razel said calmly he would make sure everything was cooked perfectly. After preparations, many people gathered in a building with very high ceilings and stood around talking while a table of various foods sat in the center of the room. She said they would all eat dragon meat. She added that she never thought she would see such a day. Mercier said she couldn't believe it, even though the meat tasted great. Razel said active dragons usually have tough meat, but after years of sleep, it becomes tender and delicious. Mercia said that after finishing her training, she killed a dragon and now enjoys a brief moment of peace. Nothing has been decided yet because nothing has really started. She promised to do everything she could to make the peace last forever. The girl looked up and said the real battle would begin very soon. Then she asked whether that was true. Razel confirmed this, saying dragons cannot match the power of fusion heroes, and he spoke very seriously. Mercier knew this well, because an utterly repulsive goddess lurks behind every lineup of heroes, manipulating people from the shadows for thousands of years, and no one knows what she will do if she starts to lose. Shishiel lifted her gaze and said they must stay orderly and control themselves. Razel closed his eyes and said she was absolutely right. Smiling, the girl told the guys she truly believes the two of them can handle whatever comes next. Mercia smiled and said that once the battle was over she would leave this world and abandon the peace treaty with the Shishiel people, and the girl should not compromise with them at all. A terrible smile crossed her face as she said they could leave it to her, because every day she rehearses in her head how she will hunt the human race, and she feared what would happen if she couldn't control her power. Razel and Mercia froze with fear as Shishiel reacted. The Dark Princess was sweating with tension and said she was counting on her sister in this matter. Noise still filled the Demon King's castle. The feast had drawn a huge crowd of demons who were simply enjoying themselves. Mercia sank onto the sofa and, smiling, said she simply couldn't eat another bite of what she'd already eaten. Razel admitted he found it hard to believe she was a demon lord and laughed, while Mercy rolled over, said it was because she had already eaten and was full, then ran to her sister and called her very sloppy. Both Razel and Mercia suddenly felt something was wrong and froze to listen to what had just happened. Razel turned to the girls and asked if they had noticed what had happened. Mercia said that was exactly what had happened. The girl said dryly that there were 3 men at the main gate. They began a discussion and asked the others if they had any ideas about who the men might be, and Razel said their combat strength was hard to judge, but he was almost certain who they were. He realized these were called heroes. At that moment, the civil servant Fraud, the adventurer Rial, and the mercenary Banzo stood at the gate and all looked a little tense. Fraud smiled casually and said it turns out this is the Demon Lord's castle. Banza tensed, and Rial smiled and said he was a bit disappointed they had arrived so quickly since the trip had only taken a few months. Adventurer Rial flexed his arms and said with a wide smile that their target was the Demon Lord and he would show him everything. Banz panicked and told the hero to wait a bit. Taking a deep breath, he thought everything was bad. He realized his earlier rash words had brought no results. Rial went out to the castle gate and shouted to the demons to bring their lord here immediately. He was completely serious. The guards drew their swords and demanded to know what was happening and who the orcs were. They declared these people would never enter the castle. Rael was genuinely offended to be called an orc, and clenching his fist, he demanded to know what this demon had just said. Angry and flexing his arms, the Rial said the guard clearly wanted to be beaten, and for the last time asked whether the demon would bring his master to them. The guard stood his ground and said firmly he would defend the gate even if it cost him his life. She looked at it with concern and said the situation must be very bad. Rizel suggested it was time for them to go outside. Mercia took a deep breath and agreed they would have to go out. Razel said that by that logic he should have been dead long ago, but he still looks the same. Mercy suggested Razel might have disguised himself, and the man thought about it, then said he probably should have. The hero assumed a fighting stance to defeat the demon. The guard pushed his weapon forward, ready for a fierce clash at any moment. Rial screamed, and the guard did the same, provoking the hero to attack him. They lunged at each other, but just before their guns met, a loud explosion sounded, surprising them both and briefly halting the fight. Rial jumped back and asked what had happened. Fraud and Banza ran to the adventurers and asked if he was okay. They looked nervous. A huge cocoon of magic hung in the air before the guard and the heroes. The guard warned that it was magic. At that moment the cocoon opened, and two figures stepped out. Mercier looked at them with a cruel stare and asked the uninvited guests if they knew where they were. Riel glanced aside with mild surprise and said the Lord had appeared. Banz added carefully that the hero's step could easily destroy them. Bowing before Mercia, the Lord's castle knights apologized. He assured the girl they would gather the soldiers and destroy them immediately. Mercia told the knights not to worry. The Princess of Darkness looked at the uninvited guests and said she wanted to speak with them. Vanzo wondered whether they could manage that conversation and suggested they might get some information from the guests. Riel scowled and asked the princess how she dared speak to them like that, but Bonza stopped him and told him to wait. The hero, sounding excited, said he had an idea and asked for a minute. Riel was slightly taken aback. Banza turned to Mercia and said they were not from this world, apologizing for their impolite behavior, and the hero told the girl she seemed to be an important figure among the demons, and that he had one question he really wanted to ask her. Bonzer admitted in despair that he knew it was impolite, then asked the girl to hear him out. Riel asked skeptically whether that was really their plan, and Fraud agreed doubtfully, saying the hero is a good schemer so they should leave everything to him for now. Using telekinesis and sounding displeased, Mercia told Razel they had entered the castle, clashed, and still wanted to talk. Razel realized how things stood now with all the summoned heroes, and Mercia said she was sorry he had to face them. At that moment the hero interrupted Razel and Mercia, spoke about the brave man in the synthesis, and asked whether those words meant anything to the demons, which surprised the couple. The girl asked gloomily whether they really knew those words. Banza, shocked, asked her if she knew them too. The Princess of Darkness looked at Razel and asked what they should do now. The guy said he would leave it to the girl, and she said she understood everything. Mercy turned and announced they were moving out, told them to start preparing. Razel nodded in agreement, and Banza watched them in surprise. Riel and Fraud approached Hatsa and began asking what was going on. Riel asked why all this was necessary. Bonsa repeated the words with obvious concern, saying everything was fine. A huge seal appeared above the gathered heroes' heads, surprising them. Riel spun around, panicking, and demanded to know what was happening. Fraud said he had never seen such a large, complex magic circle. Riel snapped that this was not the time for such talk. Bonsa watched them in silence. The heroes began to swear loudly, shouting that they had been deceived. They said the demons would never talk about it. Bands looked on in shock, sure they had been deceived. Shouting, they watched the light above them grow larger. At that moment, the girl turned to the summoned heroes and told them to raise their heads. Confusion spread across the heroes' faces as they stared at the girl and froze. Mercy smiled and told the guests that the summoned heroes were in the audience hall of the Demon Lord's castle. A girl stepped forward and declared she was the Lord of Demons, while Razel stood obediently beside her. Banza was stunned to see them in the audience hall. Fraud could not believe she had moved them all. Rial, shocked, asked if it was the Demon Lord. The Princess of Darkness addressed the summoned heroes smugly, saying she would teach them the truths of the world and they could ask anything. And Bonsa immediately asked the bishop to explain what heroic synthesis is and why they had been summoned. The Demon Lord explained that, like the dozens of heroes summoned before, they should be merged into a single hero as a power source, and that this composite hero would be humanity's main weapon and the demon's sworn enemy. Bonzo was shocked to admit he had known it. At that moment, another hero shouted that they had been deceived. Riel demanded evidence and told him to produce convincing proof that the king was behind the conspiracy. Fraud tried to calm him down. Seated on her throne, Mercia said she understood his distrust, but given his short temper he should be patient for a while, leaving Banza confused. Razel looked at them and said they had not seen each other for a long time. Riel asked cautiously who he was, and the man said that, as they could see, they would not recognize him in this form. His disguise began to fade. Razel stepped forward and asked how the heroes felt. The man said he wanted them to see something. Banza, surprised, said it was the same man. Riel was shocked, and Fraud said he should be dead. Still suspicious, Rizel, while making something, told the hero to make sure it wasn't another trick, and a small camera appeared in the hero's hands. Banza looked at the image in surprise and asked if it was really the king's office. Fraud was amazed at the picture's accuracy and said it was a very good technology. Rial, confused, asked how the man had found out about the place. They studied the picture and asked who the man in front of the king was. The hero realized he had never seen that man in the palace. Mercy smiled at them and said it was convenient. The demon lord declared this was a synthetic hero, the product of their labors. Fraud objected, saying he was just an ordinary person, however you looked at him. He believed the girl might deceive the other two but would not fool him. A man pointed at the screen and asked if they could see the numbers on the video. The heroes asked what it was. Rizel said it was his first measured combat value since he arrived in this world. Fraud was stunned that a hero could be summoned with such power and asked if that number came from combining all the heroes ever summoned. The Princess of Darkness said they had been summoning heroes from the start, and those heroes became nothing but food for the monster. Vanza replied in shock that it was impossible and asked whether they would no longer be able to return to their world. Fraud, with tears in his eyes, could not believe he would never see his family again. The hero asked what they should do, and Riel swore heavily and asked how this was possible. Mercy met their gaze and said gravely that the demons had long been oppressed by humans because of their strength and numbers, and that was the truth of the world. Angrily, the girl spoke about years of oppression and about what they had done to their friends, people, and homeland, and said she would never forgive the human race. At that moment, Bonds fell to his knees and begged the girl for at least some help. Shouting, the hero said he'd take any job, whether it was a chore or for a minion, and that he'd do whatever they ordered. The demon lord looked at them and said she wondered what the other summoned heroes thought of her. Fraud fell silent, and the real side showed displeasure. The next moment Fraud bowed too, saying he agreed, and when the rail called out to the hero in surprise, he apologized and said he wanted to go home at any cost. Rial clenched his teeth and bowed to the girl, while Banza turned to the demon lord, begged her to pity the poor fools, and asked the girl to save them. Mercia smiled at them and said she was giving the heroes their first order. The demon lord told the summoned heroes that all three of them must die, and they stared up at her in shock. News spread through the kingdom that a group of adventurers sent into demon territory had sparked an internal conflict that killed the demons, and people said that, given the adventurers' past behavior, the demons would charge them with murder. The report described this as negligence that resulted in a death. The minimum penalty for that is 1 year in prison. The king frowned at the report in his hands and said it was fair. He was relieved they didn't start whining or demanding a trial. The king said it wasn't easy to deal with accusations from cursed demons. At that moment, a ring lit up above his head. A sudden movement overhead made the man look up. He cursed loudly and screamed, then fell to the floor clutching his head and asking what had happened and what had fallen. When he looked closer, he froze in shock for a moment. Bodies lay on the floor before the king, and a man, horror on his face, began to stutter and shout that they were corpses. Seeing holes in their bellies, the king was shocked, asked why they were in his office, and moments later began to lose consciousness, calling it a nightmare. Earlier, the summoned heroes gathered in the demon lord's castle, and the Princess of Darkness announced her first order. The heroes must die for her. The summoned heroes, shocked, asked whether the girl had really deceived them after all. Banza asked what that meant. Mercier looked at them and said she was only telling the truth. Razel turned to the girl, a little excited, and asked whether he could stop torturing him already. The girl mumbled thoughtfully. The Dark Princess laughed loudly in agreement with the man and said she had already seen the silly faces of their summoned heroes. Riel asked in surprise what had just happened. Riel frowned and asked the girl if they were really a joke to her. Razel noticed the girl seemed to have offended him. Mercia smiled and apologized, saying she was just amused. Excited, Banza called to the hero, and Rial admitted he was definitely not one of those smart people who plan ahead, so he asked the girl to explain it in terms he could understand. Mercy looked at the hero in surprise, then told him not to belittle himself because she likes honest people like him. The Princess of Darkness turned to Erasel and asked him to explain it to the others. Erasel agreed. Razel explained that the heroes had been told he was dead and asked how they thought he had deceived his pursuers and the kings. Fraud assumed it was some kind of special magic. Banza said he had tricked them into thinking he was dead. Riel said he would run as hard as he could. Rysel admitted he had disguised the body. The heroes were surprised and said it didn't sound good, and Fraud said he understood what Rysel meant. Rial asked, puzzled, what it meant. Fraud replied that it meant the man had another body. Banza decided the man had committed murder. Razel intervened, saying he had not killed anyone in this world and that he had prepared his own corpse. Mercia laughed because she did not believe him, and the man complained that the girl was not laughing. Fraud sighed and asked whether the man really meant he had another body. Bonza said he thought it was nonsense, and Real, horrified, said he did not like ghosts or anything like that and asked for a break. Rizel used those multi-purpose stem cells to clone himself, the same magic Frode used and the magic behind cloning the Foucault boy, and although cloning exists in his world, it is still far from practical, so it made sense for Rizel to use it. Real believed that if you died in battle, you would move into another body, and excitedly said that even if it was a clone, he would still be alive, then asked if that was the case and said he didn't like it. Fraud said it was clearly unethical. Bonza asked about the general ethical implications of cloning. Riola felt uneasy at the thought of his copy standing beside him. Razel said in confusion that their functions were greatly reduced. Then the man spoke up to summarize briefly. The men were scared by the loud noise. Razel insisted they should use clones this time. He said he did not care what the others thought and would complete his mission. Mercia stepped in and awkwardly asked whether they needed the man's consent to do that. They had used advanced cloning magic. The bodies looked real, which amazed the heroes. Rizel repeated what he'd explained, that the life support functions had been cut. The man said he was using the clones' corpses to fake their deaths. Fraud asked what they would do with the staged corpses since it was too dangerous to leave them on human territory. Bonza added that if left in a deserted place, the corpses would rot and become unrecognizable, and Rizel agreed and said he had an effective way. Razel told the heroes he would send the body straight to the king's office, and Mercia said she would attach a sealed letter to it using her magic. Sometime later, in the king's chambers, someone hesitantly tried to wake his majesty, and the man frowned and mumbled. Regis excitedly told the king that he had woken up. The king called to Regis, and a servant said he suddenly heard screams, ran to check, and saw a man surrounded by corpses. The exhausted king confirmed the presence of the corpses, then suddenly opened his eyes and asked what kind they were. Regis said he had confirmed these were the 3 summoned heroes he had sent to the demon lord's castle. The king said he understood, added that the lord had finally crossed the line, and wondered if it was too early to return the bodies. Regis hesitated and tried to add something about it. The servant handed the small device to the king, saying he thought the king would find the answer in it. The man frowned and asked what kind of device it was. Regia said a device and a letter were left beside the corpse, and it looked like a device for transferring summoned heroes. The servant said its range was 20,000 kilometers. The king said the demon king's castle is 4,000 kilometers away, but the king still could not believe such a device. Angry, the king cursed the demons for capturing a high sage, saying they could not have built such a mysterious device otherwise, and a man asked Regis what the letter said, while the servant immediately handed it to the king. The letter said it was the season for eating food in pots, so they readied the donated summoned heroes and sent them back, and the girl said they had taken care of the sleeping ancient dragon and wanted to cancel the contract, so the food trade was canceled, and the arrival of heroes counted as a declaration of war. Angry after reading the letter he had left, the king squeezed it and shouted that it was brazen, raged about renegotiating the treaties, and asked whether Fladialka knew what it meant, while Regis urgently told him to calm down for the sake of his health. The king feared they planned to make false accusations and quickly overthrow the kingdom. The man swore silently at the girl and all her people. Calling Regius, the man ordered him to tell the synthetic heroes to prepare for the campaign and instructed the servant to send them back to the demon lord with the message that they would crush and burn their lands. Regia shuddered and, respectfully addressing the king, said the demon's recent movements were suspicious and that it was better to send scouts first to check on them. The king glared at the servant and asked whether Regis was really challenging him. A man then asked the servant whether he wanted the king to execute him. Regis sighed in fear and told the king he would do as he wished. The king cursed the demon lord in his mind for forgetting his place and decided to use the newly created heroes to remind him. Loud laughter echoed through the castle in the dark of night. The king decided it was time to end it. The Princess of Darkness laughed as she watched them, joyfully claimed the king had fallen for her tricks, then went sad and quiet and falsely said this was what the demon lord looked like, and Banza, confused, said she was no different from any other little girl. Razel said the king would never do as he was told, but if it was framed as an attack on his character or worth, everything would change. Mercia smiled and said she did not think a man would fall for that so easily, then laughed. The demon lord sighed with satisfaction and said she had clicked in the right spot. Razel exhaled with a smile and said the girl had finally done it. The guy said he'd be there soon then. Rial said he didn't know what to do now that they'd shown him everything. Fraud awkwardly admitted he was ashamed of what he'd been doing. Banzo said he hadn't noticed before. Apparently that was because they'd been kept in luxury. Mercia was relieved they caught the men before they were synthesized. Rial said it didn't sound right. Fraud agreed with Rial and said it was nothing compared to cloning. Banza has been on edge ever since he heard that. Razel turned to the guy and noticed they were too relaxed. Someone knocked on the door. Razel looked toward it, wondering who it was. A man said he had brought them a teleportation grimoire. Razel agreed and accepted it. The servant told them they had received a letter. Mercia welcomed him and thanked him for his hard work. Smiling, the girl said she would rely on him if anything else came up. He agreed and quickly left the room. The Princess of Darkness wanted to know what the letter said. She opened it, read it carefully, and said she understood everything. Razel asked what was going on with the king and whether they got what they wanted, and the girl smiled and said it was great. Mercia said that a month later, in the western desert of Manaris, the king asked the synthesized Hera to pacify the demon lord because of a violation of Article 7.3 of the contract between humans and demons. Riel said the war had finally begun. Prad said he had never been this nervous. Banza said he had never fought anyone much stronger than him. The demon lord turned to them and asked what they were talking about. Rizel said he wouldn't touch them this time. Rial, Fraud, and Banza looked at the couple in front of them, clearly puzzled by the information. Razel said only a few people will take part in this war, that humanity's goal is to show the overwhelming power of synthetic heroes, defeat the demon lord, and seize control of the demons, and that the chance of a surprise attack is extremely low. Mercia said she would use it to strike back at the synthetic heroes, humanity's main weapon, and crush their arrogance. The summoned heroes stared at the girl in disbelief, saying it could not be true and trying to figure out what she meant. The demon lord said confidently that she and the synthetic heroes would fight alone. Inside the demon lord's castle, Razel sighed and said that for now things would stay this way. Seeing Rizel, a disheveled Banza wished him a good morning. The hero asked what Rizel was doing here. Rizel said he was preparing for a decisive battle and assumed the hero was out for a morning walk. Banzo said yes and that he was warming up. Glancing at the strange device, he asked the man whether he was using it to prepare. Rizel explained it was an artifact that projects an image. The man said he had installed them across the territory, even inside the castle. Shocked to discover they were installed across the territory, the hero asked the man if he really had that many magic stones. Banza hoped one would not be needed for every device. Razel said he did not have enough, and Fraud shared some of his because he can use storage magic. Banzo realized the final battle had been scheduled yesterday. He was amazed that the guy had created so many artifacts in one day. The hero concluded the guy was definitely more dangerous than the Princess of Darkness. The hero asked Ryza why he was posting them at all. Ryza said he wanted everyone to see the battle between the Princes of Darkness and him. Banza asked why the man needed it. Razel said it would show the girl's strength so no one would even touch a finger, even after the princess was gone. The hero was confused by Razel's answer and asked why she would not be there. Razel assumed the Princess of Darkness planned to leave, and he smiled, saying he wanted to invite her into his world and that someone should get what he deserved. Banzo reeled in shock, wondering if a world really existed where a man could not be defeated by Razel, and he thought their summoned heroes could not even scratch him. The hero looked at the man in front of him, relieved they had not fought, and offered his help, which Razel thanked him for. After a while, the girl began counting into the microphone to test the sound. People gathered at the noise, wondering what was happening, and recognized Saren's voice, while Zarina thanked the assembled demons for waiting and said the decisive battle between the hero and the Princess of Darkness is about to begin. The demoness on the screen told them to look at the large army gathered against them today and smiled as Zarina, from the Princess of Darkness's guard, said she would comment. Razel scanned the assembled soldiers and noted there were fewer than he expected. Mercy added they probably thought demons were weak, and the Princess of Darkness said they would need to be put in their place this time. By this point, someone stepped forward to say the demons were showing off and could fly, and he said with displeasure that there were actually only 2 of them and that they had underestimated the demons. An armored man appeared before them and greeted Mercia, saying they had not seen each other in a long time and that the Princess of Darkness had become a beautiful woman. Mercy said compliments from someone who can't remember her name are empty. The girl added she can't see the goddess anywhere, and the man laughed, saying that was natural because the goddess would not come and that neither of them would have been enough, only he alone would have sufficed. Telepathically, the Princess of Darkness asked Rizel if there were signs of the goddess nearby. Rizel replied there were, but the goddess was not in combat mode. He assumed the goddess was just watching to avoid getting bored. The girl said she understood, and that meant the goddess was not going to help them. Razel realized the goddess would not attack and drew some conclusions. He suddenly remembered something important and said he had to leave the girl alone, confident she could cope and calling himself forgetful, while Mercy, amused, asked if he was up to something again. Mercia exhaled in displeasure, smiled, and said that even if she asked him to stay he would still leave, asked if that was true, and told him to just go. Relaxing, the Princess of Darkness said she would be finished here by the time the guy returned, and Razel, disappearing into the air, smiled at the girl and said he would be only glad. The hero called to the girl with a smile and said she was really going to fight alone, suggested the entire demon race might help her, and added that then she might have a chance, while Mercy just looked at him in silence. A small laugh escaped the Princess of Darkness, and when the girl laughed out loud, the hero, confused, asked what had happened because he could not understand what was funny. Mercy smiled and said she could finally see the difference in their strength, adding that she couldn't believe she had been afraid of such a weakling, while the girl looked at the guy gloomily and said how funny it was. The hero said in disgust that he really was a weakling and asked whether the girl was talking about him. The mood around him shifted. Facing the knight, he said he could handle it alone. He warned them not to climb, and the knight quickly agreed. Dark energy quickly wrapped the Princess of Darkness's body as she mocked the hero for falling for a simple provocation. Mercia waved her hand quickly and warned that the hero would die today. The man, determined, also rushed into battle. The hero swung his sword complacently, sending an attack through the air, and said he would finish in 10 seconds. Mercia easily blocked the hero's attack with her shield, then lifted her head to the sky as clouds gathered and lightning began to strike. A bolt of lightning struck the ground where the man stood, hitting the hero and making him scream. Blood began to drip onto the ground. Angry, the hero glared at the girl and cursed her. Mercy looked at him with boredom and asked if he was still on his feet. The Princess of Darkness left, saying such a wound could not be healed right away. The hero sighed again in pain. Smiling, the hero said he could easily heal the wound, but he had no time to finish, so the girl took the next step. Numerous explosions sounded above the man's head, drawing his attention. Mercia snapped her fingers while the man grinned and said the girl was scaring him with firecrackers, and a sudden attack struck him, catching him off guard. Blood poured from the hero's mouth as he noted how fast it flowed. The girl conjured something instantly. Mercia smiled and said the guy was a fool. The Princess of Darkness sent her energy toward the man. The hero smiled and thanked her for letting him heal. As he tried to say what he would do next, he couldn't speak. He froze as her energy enveloped him. Mercy's power rapidly spread from his wound through his body, and he asked in shock what was happening, while Mercy had thoughtfully said it must be something like that, and believed that would be enough. Looking down at the wounded hero, the Princess of Darkness said matter-of-factly that she was simply stronger than him and that it was over. The hero fell back, exhausted. A man said this was how it would end. Collapsing, his body began to disperse, leaving only a skeleton. Mercy watched the scene without emotion and stayed silent. After a few moments, she said it was boring. In shock, a knight from the hero's army approached the fallen man's body and said this cannot be. He hesitantly called to the hero, but there was no answer. Zarina looked at it and shouted into the light about the latest events. The demoness said the hero got such a stupid ending. Zarina shouted that the Princess of Darkness would certainly win. Others shouted their support for her. The demoness announced that the broadcast would end, then offered congratulations to the Princess of Darkness, and the broadcast ended. Mercia turned around to face the man and asked if he had seen everything, adding that she had finished quickly. Razel smiled and agreed it had been a wonderful battle, and the man said he had finished his business too. Mercia grinned and asked Razel what he was doing there. Razel smiled sweetly and said he hadn't done anything wrong, then admitted he had just stolen one of the hero's artifacts. Mercia sighed, surprised. In shock, she asked whether it was the same artifact, and the man confirmed it, smiling as he said we couldn't just leave him. Mercia asked eagerly if she could try it now, and Razel, removing his disguise, told her to wait until the audience had left. Razel looked up and spoke to God with confidence, saying he knew God was watching, shouted that he had taken the hero's artifact and demanded God appear, but no one answered his cry. Razel looked around as the Princess of Darkness explained how the provocation had worked. God did not appear. Mercia angrily said how much the fee was. The man closed his eyes, smiled, and said there was nothing wrong with that and that he would soon arrange for him to appear. Excited, Mercy looked at Razel and asked if he was going to do it right now. Razel turned and smiled, answering yes. The man said he would start an experiment to synthesize him, and the hero was determined. Mercia smiled and said that even if she asked him to stay, he would still leave. She asked if that was true and then said he simply had to go. The girl said she would be finished here by the time he returned. Razor said she would be glad to help, and when he left, he thought that with her skills the girl could manage here without him. With security weakened, he figured he could steal the hero's synthesizer. Razel studied the map carefully and concluded from the image that the device was likely nearby. After a while, the man entered a closed room, looked around, and found it empty. Razel studied the device at the center as he scanned the room and realized there were no traps. He grabbed it, thinking they had underestimated him. Razel stared at the device in his hands, sure no one would come. Nothing else happened. He was unhappy that he had gotten it so easily. Relief came when he realized he would have more free time. At that moment, something caught his eye and surprised him. He smiled as he imagined what would happen if he used the device. After that, the man returned to the Princess of Darkness, who watched the stricken hero and wondered if she had already finished. Mercia asked Razel if he had seen everything and said she had finished quickly, and Razel agreed, calling it a great battle and saying he had finished his business. And when Mercia asked what the other man had been doing, Razel replied he had done nothing wrong and had only stolen a hero's artifact. Shocked, the Princess of Darkness asked if this was the same artifact. A man answered yes, saying they can't just leave him like that. The girl asked eagerly if they could try using it now. Razel smiled and said she should wait because the audience was waiting. Razel turned to God and said he knew what he was seeing, and the man said he had taken the hero's artifact and told God to reveal himself immediately. Mercia, confused, said God was not showing himself. The guy replied the provocation had not worked and that there was nothing wrong because he would soon create a situation where God would show up. The girl eagerly asked if he would do it right then. Razel confidently announced he would begin an experiment to synthesize himself and the hero. Mercia was confused because the experiment was about a man, not her, so she clarified the situation. Razel said the artifact most likely absorbs one person's magic and boosts another's, increasing the total magical supply. Mercia listened carefully, thought it over, and asked if it would be better to use it on her instead of the guy. A visibly surprised man asked Mercy whether she really had not noticed, and she stared at him in disbelief. Razel said that by magical power, the girl was stronger than him, and Mercy was confused because she didn't believe she was stronger than the guy. Razel said the girl is strong and will grow even stronger, so she must. He reminded her he had said she needed a comrade to fight at her side. Mercia repeated thoughtfully that the man was her friend. Not joking, he said he didn't want her to be weaker than him because he couldn't afford to be so weak he'd be no good. Mercia agreed, understanding. Razel added that the device held another secret. The girl was surprised. The man said he must be connected to the goddess. Mercia, shocked, asked what would happen if the goddess suddenly took over the guy's mind. Razel replied that if he took advantage of that, it might be true, but the guy was well versed in mind control magic, so he was confident he could resist. The princess was upset that even when he said he disagreed, the man would go ahead anyway, and Razel said he really wanted to try it. Razel said with interest that he wouldn't know if it would work until he tried it. Mercy frowned at him and said he had no sense of self-preservation at all. He said eagerly it was time for them to try, and she thought that if she had agreed happily then, he would have died of joy. Razel raised the device in front of him and said they could begin, and at that moment the deceased hero's body was enveloped in power. Holding the device, he felt the energy start to flow into him and was deeply surprised. Mercia stood beside him, shielding her eyes with her hand from the overly bright light coming from the man. Razel closed his eyes, convinced there were no problems with the launch and that no one was trying to control him. Anxious, the Princess of Darkness asked how the process was going, and Razel said the magical power was off the scale, but everything seemed under control. Smiling broadly, he told her their experiment was a success. Mercia looked at the man holding the light, then shouted with joy, thinking it was impossible. Razel noticed something and he and the girl turned to see a man standing before them, so Razel asked whether he was the army commander. The girl thought so, but the man said no. Shocked, he asked where the couple had gotten it. Razel and Mercia smiled contentedly. One man admitted he had stolen it and called the commander a fool. The commander could not believe it because the device was supposed to be hidden deep in the capital. Mercia landed near the man and told him to take a scroll to the king instead of showing indignation, and when he asked what it was she said, it was a document on the surrender of mankind. With tears in his eyes, the commander said that if he brought it to the king would finish him off or he would be tortured, and execution would be salvation. The princess said he was so afraid of the king that she could cut off his head right now and send it, along with the hero's corpse, to the capital and other places, and the man said in horror that he understood everything. The man ran off screaming. The girl called after him not to worry because they would reach the capital before his execution and rescue him. The commander agreed and said they should definitely come. The soldiers turned to the commander, confused, asking what had happened there. The commander said they were retreating and told me not to ask unnecessary questions. Razel asked Mercia if the man could deliver it. Mercia said she was sure he could handle it. the girl noticed the commander watching her. His eyes pleaded for them to save him, or his ghost would curse them for the rest of their lives. The Princess of Darkness gave an awkward wave and laughed, then declared she knew everything and that nothing could be done in that situation. Razel agreed, saying they needed time. Mercia looked at the retreating army and considered whether it was worth sending them away with teleportation magic. Razel raised his hand and looked at it carefully. Excited, he told Mercia he wanted to try something new with his magic. Mercia looked back, mumbled thoughtfully, and said she understood what he wanted. Razel smiled sweetly at the offended girl and asked what was wrong and whether she was in a bad mood, while Mercia twirled her hair around her finger, looked at Razel, and said it was because he was the only one who got something new and that she was the one who had defeated the hero. Enthusiastically, the man looked at the Princess of Darkness, raised a finger, and told her not to worry because he had a secret plan just for her. Mercia covered her mouth in shock and reacted to the man's secret plan. Razel turned to Mercia with a wide smile and suggested they return first to the Princess of Darkness's castle. Then a man said the words Shishiel, and the others had been waiting to hear for a long time, and Mercia agreed happily, thinking of her subjects and saying she could not wait to see their surprised faces. After the conversation, the guy and the girl set off and returned home, where Mercia walked happily ahead of him, and when Razel pointed to the side in surprise, the girl turned to look in that direction. The Princess of Darkness's maids and knights filled the demon lord's palace courtyard, standing in neat rows as they waited for the girl, while Shishiel and Zarina stood at the front watching for Mercia. Mercia saw her gathered subjects and ran towards them with a joyful smile. Razel stood quietly behind her, closed his eyes, and smiled softly. The Princess of Darkness ran to her little sister Shishiel, tears in her eyes, and hugged her returning sister, and the girls were happy to see each other, while the same joyful servant stood behind them. Despite the crowd, the Princess of Darkness noticed Jack was missing for some reason and looked around in disbelief, and at that moment, a demon appeared near the sisters who were hugging. The demon held a large tray of fresh food and smiled broadly. The Princess of Darkness and her little sister looked hungrily at the steaming dish before them. Jack glanced at the girls and laughed. The sisters beamed at the huge piece of meat the demon held on the tray. Razel watched the scene with a smile. He stood a short distance from the Princess of Darkness and her sister, watching them. The girl then waved him over. After a while, the sisters went to bed and lay together. One turned to the other, and without opening her eyes, called softly to Mercy in a questioning tone. Looking at her sister with great admiration, she said she had truly defeated the hero. Mercia opened her eyes a little and agreed calmly. Then she raised her hand and studied it, saying she had done it with these hands. The Princess of Darkness's younger sister listened to Mercia in silence and admitted slowly that she was very scared. Her hands were still shaking, so Shishiel gently placed her hand over Mercia's, surprising the princess. Looking at her sister with concern, she said the girl had protected her people and the whole country with her hands. The girl said it was the hand of a ruler they could be proud of. She added that this might be only the first step, but it was a very big one. Surprised, Mercia looked at her younger sister as she repeated that this might be only the first step, but it was important. Vowing from now on to protect this country and the whole world, she said she would do so even if the Princess of Darkness was not present. Outside the door, Razel stood listening to the sisters' conversation. Time had passed since then. Many demons waited for something. The Princess of Darkness stood before a large staircase, watching it. The Princess of Darkness strode forward with quick, confident steps past her nearby servants. Mercia stepped onto the broad balcony, made it her stage, and as the Princess of Darkness loudly ordered her subjects to be silent. Joyfully, the girl told the gathered demons the hero no longer posed a threat and announced they had regained their freedom. But Mercia warned this did not mean there would be no new threats, and the Princess of Darkness said she would travel with Raz Raleigh, a hero from another world, for that reason. The Princess of Darkness's subjects began whispering among themselves, full of doubt and worry. Mercia smiled, thinking they were right to be worried. The Princess of Darkness smiled and said they did not need to worry because she would leave someone for Mercia to pass her wisdom to. One girl reached out and motioned for her sister to come closer. Her sister agreed confidently. Mercia announced that while she was away, she had entrusted all power to her younger sister Shishiel, and the Princess of Darkness said that, although Shishiel still has much to learn, she is clearly better at politics than Mercia. When Mercia loudly asked her subjects if there were any dissenters, everyone remained silent. The Princess of Darkness turned to Shishiel and said it was time to greet everyone, and Shishiel humbly agreed before loudly telling all the demons to listen, warning she was not as kind as her sister, and that while Mercia was away, they must try to do their tasks even more diligently. After her short speech, Shishiel fixed an intimidating stare on her subjects and asked whether they understood everything. The assembled demons froze and hesitantly agreed. Mercy returned to Shishiel in shock and questioned whether the girl had gone too far. Several days had passed since that moment, and Mercy drew in, shivering from the cold. She asked him what they were going to do now and why they were in the middle of the ocean. Razel told her they were studying the magic of self-enhancement. Mercia wondered why they had suddenly started doing this. She asked whether Razel was referring to self-reinforcement. The man confirmed she was correct, then raised his hand and asked the girl to step back a little. A magic circle formed under Razel's feet and glowed brightly. The girl watched him closely and felt he needed more time than usual. Suddenly, a very bright flash of light appeared in front of the girl. Shock hit Mercier when the thing appeared before her. Sighing in puzzlement, she asked what it was. A loud scream followed. A huge creature stood before the Princess of Darkness, and the girl cried in horror, unsure if it was really a dragon. Mercia said in surprise that becoming a dragon was true self-empowerment, and asked, confused, how practical it was to use magic with such a large body, and Razel in dragon form said he had known she would notice it. Razel raised a finger to signal yes and said everything here was still far more interesting. Mercia looked puzzled and did not understand him, and then a sudden bright flash startled her, and she covered her eyes with her hand. Mercy said thoughtfully that the man had returned to human form. Razel put his hand on his chest and told the girl to look more closely at his body. The girl eyed him suspiciously and asked him about his words. The girl replied seriously that the quality of the magical essence had changed, and Mercia assumed the girl belonged to a dragon, saying Razel was using a human form spell since he could transform between dragon and human, and the girl thought the same. The man sighed with a smile and said he had no doubts about Mercia. The girl rubbed her nose in satisfaction and agreed. Razel asked Mercia about the advantages and disadvantages of using that magic at the same time. She frowned, annoyed he was asking questions again. After a pause, she replied that taking a dragon's bulky body would make delicate magic impossible, and a human body could not cast the powerful spells a dragon can. Then she froze in surprise and said she understood everything. Mercia said excitedly that Razel had not cancelled the transformation, but had only added a human form over the dragon, so there were no drawbacks. Razel smiled and agreed, saying his body was as strong as a dragon's, and his large size did not stop him from using magic. Pouting slightly, the girl said everything was clear. That reinforced it. It occurred to her that to turn into a dragon you had to defeat one first, since that was the prerequisite. She hadn't even considered that. Mercia asked anxiously if she could handle such an advanced technique. Razel poked her nose with a finger and, annoyed, complained that she was saying the same thing again. Mercia sighed in surprise. Razel said dragons hold a vast reserve of magical power. The man could do it only by merging with the hero's power. He explained the girl already had that power. The man shouted that this is what makes her unique. Calmly he told Mercia she always lacked self-confidence. She sighed, slightly annoyed. Razel thought years of oppression had led her to belittle herself. Razel looked at Mercia gently and began explaining how self-doubt leads to uncertainty. Mercia listened attentively to the man in front of her. Smiling, Razel said his job as a teacher was to help the girl gain confidence. Mercia smiled and apologized to the man, saying she was counting on him. The man told Mercia that to do this, she would first need to master the technique of self-reinforcement. Mercia smiled and agreed. Razel watched her and noted her good mood. Razel said Mercia had to wear the bracelet in that case. Pulling out a small piece of jewelry, he showed it to her. Mercia, confused, asked what it was. He said it would help her train to control magic. She put on the bracelet and sighed with admiration. Looking at him, she said he was handsome. Razel said excitedly that with this bracelet she could definitely use the technique, and Mercia replied happily that she would try her best. After a long time, the demon lord's castle lay shrouded in night as a large moon rose above the city. Razel sat at a small table, looking at something on the screen right in front of him. The man looked at him, sighed, and held out a finger. Then someone suddenly called his name loudly, which surprised the man. Mercia ran up to Razel with a wide smile, saying she had finally managed to use it and was very happy. Mercia stood before the man with a satisfied look and asked how it was, calling him to look at her. Razel sighed in surprise and admitted it was true, saying it was amazing. Later, Razel and Mercia went to a new place and saw a castle-like structure. The man wondered what it was, and Mercia was surprised to realize someone really lived on the moon. The man and the woman flew closer to the place. Rise thought the problem was how to get them inside. They spotted a small entrance that made them pause. The girl looked at him and decided it was open enough for anyone to enter. Razel was surprised and concluded it was no longer a problem. Mercia examined the entrance and frowned. She felt there was something inside. The girl said it might be a trap. Razel said no, he did not sense any hostility. Razel and Mercy decided to get closer. He said they couldn't catch the tiger cub without going into the tiger's lair, and she agreed quickly. Razel froze and Mercia's face struck the back of the man walking ahead of her. Peering around him, she asked him why he had stopped. Surprised to find air and the smell of grass here, the girl stared ahead and, confused, asked what it was all about. A wide field stretched before them, with a lone large tree at its center. The girl gasped and asked what it was. Razel told the girl calmly this was a created space, and Mercier, still confused, said creating it would take immense magic, and she did not think anyone in the world had that power. Turning to Mercia, the man said no, and explained that it was not a human being. At that moment, someone appeared behind them and asked what they needed. Mercia and Razel spun around, their faces serious. The girl smiled and said nobody had come to greet them, so they went inside on their own. An unfamiliar young man said he was too lazy to go outside. Razel studied the young man intently, recognizing a Draconian and noting his obvious strength. The young man yawned, glanced at the guests, asked what the point was, and repeated his question about what they needed here. Mercy smiled and said she could see the youth was strong and wanted to fight him, while Razel watched from the sidelines smiling, and the Draconian looked very confused. He chuckled, then said they had not even tried a surprise attack, and the girl had challenged them head-on, and he admitted he liked such straightforward people even if they showed no mercy, feeling a little ashamed. Trying to calm herself, the girl took a steadying breath. She asked the Draconian if he would accept the challenge. The young man steadied himself and agreed. Studying his guests with interest, he asked who would go first. Razel and Mercia tensed slightly at the change of scenery. The girl said the young man had turned out to be very strong, and Razel agreed that they had finally found someone truly strong. Smiling, Mercia asked the young man if they could attack 2-on-1. The Draconian replied admiringly that he hadn't had that in several thousand years and was very happy to finally have some fun. Mercia and Razel took off immediately, and the young man followed their lead. The Draconian held out his hand and said they could start. The girl said they would not hold back. Razel smiled at her and said it would be fun. Explosions rang out everywhere, signaling the start of a fierce battle. Mercia was surrounded by blasts. Acting quickly, the young man flew back to avoid the attack, and an explosion went off where he had been. In a blink, the Draconian was behind the girl. He looked at her, told her not to yawn, waved his hand, and then landed a powerful punch. The attack failed. The young man sighed and smiled, telling Razel it looked like he had managed to replace the girl and that it was pretty good. Razel stood before him with a broken barrier, smiling. At that moment, the hand clenched into a fist and was wrapped in dark energy. The young man stared at her in surprise. The Draconian could barely move. He wondered if this was the man's plan. The Draconian waved his hand with a fierce smile, declared that something so small could not hold him, and then noticed the girl beside him. Annoyed, the young man turned and cursed because he had not noticed her approach. He still couldn't tell exactly where Mercia was. An attack struck him from behind, a thick magical force that pinned him in place. The Draconian sighed in pain, sure he would not make it in time. Seizing the moment, Razel tried to attack the young man, but the young man quickly dodged the blow, dropped into a ready stance, and immediately counterattacked Razel. The Draconian's fist hit the man. The Draconian smiled as he said Razel uses magic in the form of a dragon, and Razel replied that he was only practicing. Scales quickly covered the Draconian's hand, and he muttered in frustration that it was happening again. Suspected Razel wanted to immobilize him completely. Cursed Razel, who only sighed and smiled. Mercia stepped out from behind the Draconian and kicked him. Razel said dragons quickly lose their heads in battle, and that is their weakness. Draconian turned around quickly and grinned, saying it should be a kick. At that moment, a hard blow hit his face, sending him flying as he let out a loud scream, his face covered in blood. Razel smiled down at the young man and said this was not all. The attacker struck again, driving his hand through the young man's body. A Draconian with a large hole in his body began falling from a height as a man and a woman watched, and he hit the ground with a loud bang. Wounded and on the ground, the Draconian admitted defeat and suddenly revealed that Razel and Mercia were from another world, leaving the man and the woman stunned. Razel approached the dragon and asked if he had really noticed this. The young man said yes, adding that their style of dress makes everything immediately clear. The Draconian then said he wanted to teach the young man his technique. Razel was surprised to learn it was his. The Draconian laughed and said he feared his Princess of Darkness was not agile enough. The girl only nodded in shame. The Draconian smiled at the man and asked if he would grant his final wish. Razel immediately looked to Mercia, who returned his smile and nodded. Razel knelt before the young man to show she agreed. He took the Draconian's hand, and energy enveloped them. Smiling, the man said everything had worked out. The young man, using his last strength, said he was glad to have fought such strong opponents. It had been so much fun, he added. Afterward, the young man closed his eyes and smiled as he fell silent. Mercia asked Rizel if he had died, and Rizel confirmed it. She said she still couldn't believe anyone could be that strong. Rizel replied that the young man had spent his whole life honing his skills. Mercia fell silent, clearly displeased. The girl thought the man might have injected her. The Dark Princess turned to Rizel and told him to listen. Rizel asked what had happened. Mercia asked why Rizel had killed the Draconian. Mercia said the battle's outcome had already been decided, so it was unnecessary to kill him. The girl asked whether that was true. Rizel hesitated slightly. Mercia asked whether the Draconian was the strongest in the world, and whether it would be better to win him to their side. Rizel suddenly reached out to stop her, and said she would understand once she saw the technique the young man had given him. The girl then asked for clarification about the technique. Mercia suddenly realized something, told the man to wait, and shocked, asked what technique he'd given Rizel. The man just laughed. Rizel said it was called the resurrection of the dead, and Mercia let out a shocked breath. The girl swore loudly at the Draconian, calling him a lizard. Then, turning to Rizel, she demanded he resurrect the young man, saying she would strangle him again herself.